The Damned Demon C 201-220 Chapter 201. You are ready. Underneath the maroon canvas of the evening sky, the silhouette of Floralis, a magnificent dragon of ancient lineage, roared into the ether. Astride this majestic beast were two figures, bound in an intimate embrace, their bodies pressed close against the chill of the evening winds. Rowena sat tall and graceful in the saddle, her hands firmly holding the reins of the dragon while her back found comfort and warmth against Asher's chest. She was making Floralis fly slowly on purpose so that she could enjoy this moment with him longer. Asher wrapped his arms around her slender waist, his fingers interlocking at the base of her lean stomach. His breath, warm and steady, caressed the nape of her neck, sending shivers down her spine. His eyes, however, couldn't help but take in the vast expanse of the kingdom spreading beneath them. To say Asher was awed would be an understatement. He was riding atop a huge dragon, an experience that was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Just riding atop it could make one feel the king of the world and how tiny everything below them was. Nothing could beat the thrill and awe of riding a majestic beast like this, and he couldn't help but feel like wanting one for himself. However, he felt that thought could wait for later. The wind whistled past them, tugging at Rowena's raven black hair and causing it to dance like a wild storm around them. She tilted her head to rest against Asher's shoulder as she looked at him with a soft gaze and said, I feel you are now ready to take more responsibilities for our kingdom. What you did today, our broken bar, I am sure nobody will forget it for generations to come. Without your efforts, this war would have ended in a disastrous way. The corners of his lips tugged upward in a gentle smile as his grip around her tightened ever so slightly. I feel flattered you think so. Is this why you've decided to put the Umbralfians under my control? Asher was also feeling proud of himself that he managed to quickly catch up on how to do things around here to increase Rowena's confidence in him. Rowena softly nodded as she said, I don't know how, but you are really good at dealing with people at such a young age. But what I felt most important was how you care about our entire realm as a whole, which is something not even most of my ancestors cared about. Even the Devourer wasn't that interested in conquering the humans. If he was a broken bar, we probably wouldn't still be in this hellish world. As they soared through the skies, the world below them a blend of shadows and fading light, Asher took a moment to process Rowena's words. His gaze softened, his brow furrowed in contemplation, as he found himself wrestling with an age-old question. It was a question that had likely plagued the minds of many before him, and it was his turn to voice it. The Devourer ... What kind of a guy was he? Asher asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The query seemed to hang in the wind, suspended in time as they continued their journey. Rowena regarded him silently for a moment before responding. I respect his power, his achievements. He tamed the most powerful race of beasts in our realm and even used their power as his own, built a kingdom with his bare hands, carved a home for our people out of the wild and untamed chaos. Our realm, Zoltha, wouldn't have become stronger as a whole without him, she began, her voice steady, echoing amidst the sound of Floralis flapping her wings. But as for what kind of man he was ... that's harder to say. History, as you know, is written by the victors. Asher already knew this, and that was why whenever he read up the history of anything, he would take it with a pinch of salt. This is the reason, she continued, a thoughtful frown creasing her brow. I can't be certain if the Umbralfians are lying or telling the truth about the northern lands. According to our history, the Ravager discovered these lands, empty and waiting. He built a society, a home. Then the Umbralfians emerged, causing havoc and destruction. He had no choice but to retaliate, to ensure they would never threaten our peace again. Asher sighed as he shook his head. I know a broken bar, but the story they are telling is the complete opposite. Who knows what is the truth? Rowena's words took on a serious tone, reflecting the weight of the responsibility they carried. Whether the Umbralfians' version of history is true or not doesn't matter, she said and continued, what matters is the present, and the future. That is why I want you to figure out if the Umbralfians will be a source of strength for our kingdom, or if they'll become a liability. Her eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the sprawling dark crimson clouds beneath them as she added, this is one of the reasons I didn't kill them all. Despite starting the war and the losses they caused, we need strength in numbers, allies for the future. The Umbrelfians could prove useful, once they regain their strength, and you expressed the same idea I had in my mind, making me feel that you were ready. A chuckle escaped Ash's lips as he said, "It's all because you really are a great mentor, much better than those old seniors," he said, a light teasing note in his voice. Rowena's lips slowly melted into a soft smile as she shook her head gently, though her eyes were warm. "You don't have to flatter me, Ash," she said. "This wasn't possible without your natural talent. I only guided you, but you walked the path." Asher smiled as he nodded at Rowena's words, a spark of determination flickering in his eyes. "Don't worry, I'll handle the Umbrelfians," he assured her, his tone carrying a sense of resolve. "You can focus on other important things." Rowena held his hand as she said with warmth in her eyes, "I have complete faith in you that you can handle it." Her eyes then narrowed as she added, "But I would want you to gain Isola's confidence," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "She is not just the key to our relationship with the Umbrelfians. Isola herself is quite powerful. Her strength is not lesser than a low-level soul devourer." Asher's eyebrows raised as he was astonished to learn this. He had expected Isola to be a soul purger at most, but the reality was startling. But then he glanced at Rowena, her strength reaching the peak despite their similar age, which was even more impressive and shocking, and this made him wonder if Isola's power could have reached the same level as Rowena if not for the harsh environment she lived in. Was her bloodline that powerful? Could this be why the Kraken was greatly interested? Rowena also added, "Other than that, there is the issue regarding the newborn Kraken having imprinted on both of you." Her expression suddenly became complicated as she continued, "It's strange it happened, but you have to do whatever is necessary to not let her have more influence on it than you. The best way to prevent this is to form a close bond with it." Asher nodded as he took her advice seriously. He also didn't want Isola's influence over it to become great enough to order it to kill him in his sleep or worse. "I wish it was a broken bar." Rowena's gaze became absent as she firmly pressed her lips together, thinking about how Asher was going to raise a companion along with an enemy. If only she could have taken her place. "See a broken bar wish what?" Asher asked with furrowed brows. Rowena discarded that thought and suddenly squeezed Asher's little finger in the gentle hold of her hand. "It's just that a broken bar. Even if you're going to get busy with all this, don't forget about our painting classes." Rowena's usually cold voice took on a softer tone as she turned her face away, hiding the faint blush in her cheeks from Asher's gaze. The words held more weight than they seemed to, for their painting classes were a shared sanctuary, a time and space where they were not queen and consort, but simply Rowena and Asher. It was the only time she felt most connected to him. Asher was a bit taken back, his eyes amused by the sight of the usually cold and authoritative Bloodburn Queen acting so adorably shy. He couldn't help but smile as he gently turned her face towards him, his thumb caressing her blushing cheek. Her crimson eyes, usually so distant and determined, now held a softness that seemed to melt into him. Gazing into her eyes, he said with an intensity that matched her feelings, "You don't have to worry. Even if the world was going to end, I would be spending my remaining time with you." Saying so, and being unable to resist the magnetic pull between them, Asher leaned in, his lips meeting Rowena's in a sweet, passionate kiss as the two rested in each other's embrace. As they kissed, Flowerless, sensing their need for privacy, spread its mighty wings, shielding them from the world below, ensuring that this intimate moment remained theirs and theirs alone. Together, they rode through the twilight, their hugging bodies swaying gently with the rhythm of Flowerless's flight. The silhouette of the Demonstone Castle was becoming clearer on the horizon, its tall spires reaching out towards the sky like outstretched fingers, welcoming them home. Flowerless descent was gentle, its colossal frame touching down upon the cobblestone courtyard of the Demonstone Castle with surprising grace. The guards below kneeled upon seeing their queen descending from the skies. As they dismounted from the magnificent beast, the world seemed to snap back into reality, the magic of their flight dissipating into the chilly evening air. Asher extended his hand towards Rowena, ready to assist her. "Let me help you rest," he offered, concern etched in his gaze, but Rowena simply shook her head, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. She eyed Asher, her gaze lingering on his still recovering form. "My body has already begun to recover on its own. I'll be fine soon," she reassured him. Her gaze turned more serious. "But you, I'll send the royal physician to tend to you right away. You should go to your room right away and wait for him." Rowena knew he drank a healing potion and even got checked by the best healer she could find on the spot. Yet none of it would completely help him heal unless he gets the full treatment and bed rest. A helpless sigh escaped Asher's lips. He had to agree before she nagged him further. This was something he learned by being her husband for more than a year. "Then, what will you do now?" he asked, curiosity lacing his words. Rowena's expression hardened, her gaze turning as cold as the frosty winds that whipped around the castle. "I plan to see through what I said before the people," she declared, her voice filled with determination. "I'll begin the cleansing of this kingdom, starting with the execution of the traitors within our own house." Her words hung heavy in the air, carrying the weight of justice yet to be served. "A thorough investigation will be conducted, requiring my supervision," she added, her tone brooking no argument. "We have no choice but to make an example of the traitors." However, her countenance swiftly shifted, a somber veil descending upon her radiant features. "But," she began, her voice a gravely undertone, her head slowly shaking in reluctant acknowledgement, "if we still can't find out who the mastermind is after all this, I fear we might be standing on the precipice of an unseen, far greater peril." With the sun casting soft shadows across the castle grounds, Marina led Isola through the labyrinthine corridors of the Demonstone castle. The hushed whispers of servants echoed faintly as they passed, their curious and wary eyes fixed on the 6-feet-tall enchanting figure of the Umbral princess following behind the royal consort's maid. Rumors have already reached them that the Umbral princess was stripped of her title and was now the Umbral emissary, working for the royal consort, much to their surprise and dissatisfaction. Why should a defeated enemy enjoy a higher status than them? "Right this way, Emissary Isola," Marina said, her tone polite as she knew this woman was going to be quite important to her master. Isola followed silently, her curious eyes scanning the dark ornate curtain and towering statues that adorned the castle's halls. She was far from her abyssal home, in a place filled with strange sights and unfamiliar faces, bound by the whims of a kingdom that had ensnared her people. Yet she couldn't help but feel herself looking around like a newborn, trying to get familiar with this foreign yet interesting environment. Finally, they reached the outer edges of the castle, where the imposing stone walls gave way to an oasis of tranquility. The gloaming pavilion, nestled amidst the sprawling inner castle gardens. The indoor pavilion was a sight to behold. Moonflowers and night-blooming jasmine lent an ethereal quality to the air, their blue and black blossoms shimmering under the soft light of the setting sun. A large pool, filled with crystal-clear water, was situated at the heart of the pavilion, its surface reflecting the first stars of the evening sky from the roof above. The overall atmosphere was one of serene solitude, providing a stark contrast to the grandeur and hustle of the castle. "This will be your quarters, Emissary Isola," Marina announced, gesturing towards the pavilion. Isola surveyed the area, her surprised gaze lingering on the pool. It was far from the crushing depths of her home, yet the sight of water brought a small sense of familiarity in this alien world. She wasn't even expecting a room but some dark and dirty corner to be put in, and so, seeing all this left her feeling baffled. "I trust it will be to your liking. My master felt this place would be better than the usual rooms," Marina continued, though there was a tinge of uncertainty in her voice. She was well aware of the resentment boiling under Isola's silent exterior. Even if she was an emissary, it wouldn't change the fact that she and her people were chained to this kingdom. Isola's response was a curt nod as she came out of her reverie, her eyebrows furrowed, wondering what this so-called master was trying to achieve by playing nice. Was he planning something sinister for later? She had no plans to buy into this picturesque scenery, though inwardly, she felt maybe things could have been worse for her. She also understood the need for diplomacy, for the sake of her people, and so, she decided to be prepared to cross any difficulties, even in the heart of enemy territory. Marina addressed her emissary Isa. However, before she could finish, Isola lifted a hand, signaling her to stop. No need for the formalities, Marina, Isola interrupted, her voice carrying a hint of authority despite its gentle tone. Just Isola will suffice. Marina looked slightly taken aback, but quickly nodded with a light smile. Of course, broken bar Isola, she stuttered, the simple name feeling foreign on her tongue. Isola paused, her sharp gaze taking in the sight of the werewolf maid. Eth diaresis eth macron eth az eth superscript 1 eth registered eth macron dot ftm currency eth. As she had heard stories, tales steeped in lore about the animosity between the werewolves and the Bloodburn Kingdom, it was a strange sight to see a werewolf still alive in enemy territory, and it piqued Isola's curiosity. Can you tell me something? Marina broken bar Isola began, her voice carefully neutral. How does a werewolf like you come to serve in this kingdom? Was it him? Has he forced you into serving him? Marina's eyes widened slightly, and her hands momentarily stilled on the fabric she was smoothing. After a moment, she responded in a soft but steady voice, No, Isola, I am a refugee who was allowed to serve the royal family by the late Bloodburn King. I chose to serve here since I can't go back, and my master is kind and has allowed me to live a better life than I could ever dream of. Marina's eyes became warm, and her cheeks blushing slightly as she added, Without him, I would have continued to live without a purpose of my own. The soft murmur of Marina's admission hung in the air of the pavilion like an uninvited guest, casting ripples of perplexity across Isola's expression. She had prepared herself to hear at least hints of compulsion or coercion, yet the gentle, almost fond words of the maid painted a picture she could not quite comprehend. There was no sign of resentment, no hidden anger, only genuine warmth. It was a puzzle that seemed to challenge all she had come to believe about Asher. Why would she talk about someone like Asher in that way? Was she under some kind of spell? However, she decided to probe further another day. For now, she had a lot to learn and understand in this new environment. Her thoughts were interrupted by the creaking of the pavilion door. A cold gust of wind snuck into the room, carrying with it the scent of the night's chill and the faintest echo of Asher's commanding voice. Marina, you may leave now. The voice, so distinctively Asher's, was like a pebble thrown into a still pond, breaking the tranquility of the moment. Marina, her eyes wide with surprise, quickly bowed her head in acknowledgement. Why yes, master, she stuttered, gathering the fabrics in her arms and retreating towards the door. Isola narrowed her eyes as Asher's tall figure filled the doorway, blocking the pale light from the evening skies that painted the pavilion in silhouettes. She instinctively straightened her posture, her eyes alert and wary. His sudden appearance was akin to a predator entering the den of its prey. The tension in the room tightened like a drawn bowstring, yet she remained resolute, her gaze never wavering from his figure. What do you want now? Isola asked with a doubtful look as she saw Asher slowly walking towards her with a subtle smile. The sound of Asher's chuckle bounced off the pavilion's stone walls, echoing in the stillness of the twilight. His face was illuminated by the light of the setting sun streaming in through the window, giving it an almost otherworldly glow. There's no need to be on guard, princess, he said, a charming smile playing on his lips. I'm not going to bite. His words hung in the air between them, a taunt masked as reassurance. Isola eyed him skeptically, her arms crossed defensively across her chest. I don't need your fancy rooms or your empty words, she retorted, her voice echoing with defiance. Don't think you can trick me again. I know you intend to exploit my people for your own gain. Asher didn't flinch at her accusation. Instead, he simply closed the distance between them, his figure looming over her. With him standing so close, she wanted to take a step back, but she didn't want to in case he took it as a sign of weakness. Asher's voice was calm, almost soothing, as he countered her skepticism. You should be grateful, Isola. You and your people now have a chance at survival instead of rotting away in the darkness. His eyes bore into hers with an intensity that was hard to look away from. Everything else I told you back when we were in the Kraken's belly was the truth. especially the part where your people won't survive if they kept fighting. As for the part where I tricked you. Why would I reveal my identity while your people were attacking my kingdom? Would any sane enemy do that? Isola's mouth tightened into a thin line, her gaze lowering at his words. She wanted to argue, to rebuke his claim, but a part of her couldn't deny the logic behind his argument. Even so, she couldn't get rid of the bitterness in her chest that was left behind by his deception. Asha watched as Isola's expression subtly shifted, her defiance momentarily flickering into uncertainty. Sensing the slight change in her demeanor, he leaned against the cool stone of the wall and spoke, his voice heavy with sincerity. I also meant what I said in the Kraken's belly. Isola, he began, his gaze steady on her. Your life. It's worth more than just a sacrifice. Asha then added in his mind, worthy enough to be a powerful pawn in my hands. Isola's gaze dropped to the floor, a sudden confusion creeping into her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a hardened stare, meeting his gaze once again. And why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you believe that? Asha gave a dismissive shake of his head. It doesn't matter why, but because you lived. Didn't you get to save the lives of your people as well? Just like I said? That ice a broken bar. Isola couldn't exactly refute that as well, even though her life was used as a tool to make her people surrender. Still, there was a lingering doubt about whether the prophecy would have come to fruition if Asha hadn't tricked her. You couldn't have known for sure, she added softly with a distant gaze. Asha gave a direct stare as he said with a set jaw, seriously? I can't fathom how you and your people could be so blinded by a prophecy. Just words, Isola, that you'd throw your lives away for it. You are also too gullible enough to let your own people turn you into a mere sacrificial offering. His voice contained a hint of his own anger as he remembered certain people in his previous life. Isola's eyes flared at his words. Don't disrespect my people and the prophecy of my God by saying that, she said in an offended tone, her expression contorted. It's our guiding light, the beacon that led our ancestors through the darkness for millennia. It was the only thing that motivated my people all this time to survive, and my people weren't forcing me into it. They believed in me, and I believed in the prophecy. Asha merely scoffed in response, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Your so-called prophecy would have led you straight to death. You'd all have died clinging to that prophecy if I hadn't stepped in. He pushed off from the wall, coming to stand in front of her once more. His face was serious, his eyes intense. Leave it. I don't want to argue about this anymore, he said firmly, but believe me or not, I intend to forge an alliance with your people, a strong, friendly alliance. We have a common goal, making the human world succumb to us, but whether that alliance takes shape, that's in your hands. His words, audacious as they were, stirred something within her, a tumult of feelings she was not yet ready to confront. Her mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, a tussle between the anger she felt for Asha's deceit and the undeniable truth in his words. This time she couldn't help but feel that maybe he was telling the truth about this. Otherwise, worse things could have happened to her and her people. She didn't even dare imagine what would have happened to her if she had ended up as a prisoner in the hands of someone else. She had noticed the dirty looks from the men in this castle and on the battlefield, especially from the nobles, who were supposed to have more decency and manners. It was the first time she felt so disgusted since all her life. Nobody looked at her like that. Still, she didn't know why Asha was so motivated about bringing down the humans. Most or all of them can hardly have the luxury to worry about their own lives, let alone worry about the future of the entire realm. Nevertheless, this made her feel a bit relieved and hopeful that her people probably wouldn't be treated harshly. While Isola found herself lost in a whirlpool of thoughts, Asha's eyes suddenly fluttered and drooped, his face paling noticeably. Before he could even realize what was going on, his knees buckled, his body swaying dangerously before it collapsed onto a distracted Isola. You, caught off guard, Isola gasped in surprise, her slender frame rigid as his head lolled onto her smooth shoulder and his body went limp against hers. Caught in the sudden, unexpected intimacy of Asha's body pressed against hers, Isola's thoughts raced, a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. Just as she was beginning to think he was not vulgar like the other nobles, was he now trying to take advantage of her? Her eyes flared with fierce determination as she was prepared to shove him off, but just as she was about to act, something within her stilled. His breath, shallow and uneven, tickled her neck. His body lay heavy and unresponsive against hers. This wasn't the lecherous advance she had thought. Asher was unconscious, his body alarmingly weak and limp, and she immediately understood why. Just like what happened to her, the mother kraken had not only siphoned his life force but his blood force as well. A person's blood force could be understood as the essential energy that was both sustained and transmitted by the blood through generations. It was a mystical power that pulsated within the very life fluid of an individual, originating from their lineage and ancestry. But having one's blood force siphoned was even more dangerous than having only their life force siphoned. As Isola crouched down, carefully laying Asher's unconscious form onto the cool floor of the pavilion, she was acutely aware of the lethargic pulse of his heart. His energy was ebbing away, after getting ruthlessly drained by the mother kraken, leaving behind a frail shell that would break within a minute or two. Her gaze hardened as she contemplated the situation. Here he was, the man who tricked and used her to make her people surrender, the man who held the fate of her people in his grasp with no telling what he was going to do with them all. It would be so easy to let him slip away, to watch as his life force dwindled until there was nothing left. A dangerous light shone in her eyes. If he died now, no one would suspect her even if they investigated his death, since she did nothing to him. Yet, a part of her recoiled at the thought. She remembered his words in the kraken's belly, the moment where she realized how her life can hold more meaning, and despite the bitterness that lingered in her heart, some of his words he said at that time still resonated within her. With a sigh, her gaze softened as her eyes began to glow with a new resolve. She could hate him, yes, but if he has to die, it shouldn't be like this. And the next moment, a stream of water slowly rose from the pool as a soft melody filled the air. Lost in the labyrinth of unconsciousness, Asher's mind was a tempest of darkness and pulsating pain. Each beat of his heart was a hammer blow, echoing through the void that had become his existence. Yet, through the disorienting blackness, a melody pierced, a beacon of sound that broke through the desolate silence, carrying with it a message, a woman's voice weaving words into a blend of soulful music. Upon the crossroads of light and dark, a choice awaits. The voice was surreal, ethereal, the words laden with a melancholic beauty. It was a lament, a plea, a question, and a challenge, all wrapped into a 5-sentence melody. It sang of choices, of futures uncertain, of the power to build or destroy. His pain, a constant, oppressive companion, seemed to lose its intensity under the song's influence. The harsh hammering in his chest softened, becoming a rhythmic lullaby that echoed the melody. His body, battered and worn, seemed to find solace in the tune, a soothing balm that eased the gnawing discomfort. Will the heart of steel bring a dawn, or an endless night? eth''ftm''eth''ftm''eth''ftm diaresis f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f''f'' of the abyss, their fate within his sight, a dance with danger. Will it be our salvation, or invite our plight? The woman's voice seemed to wrap around him, like a warm, comforting blanket in a chilling winter night. It was a lifeline in the darkness, an unexpected reprieve from the torment. It was as if the song was healing him, mending his wounds, and providing him with a sense of tranquility he hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. As the final notes of the song echoed in his mind, Asher felt a sense of peace settle over him. The throbbing pain ebbed away, replaced by a soothing calm. His heart steadied, his breaths deepened, and for the first time since his collapse, he felt a flicker of strength returning. It was as if the song, mysterious and beautiful, had breathed life back into him, giving him the strength to continue to fight the battle that raged within his body. Submerged in the abyss of unconsciousness, the woman's voice trailed off like a dying echo, leaving Asher adrift once more. The void was soon filled with a new scenery that just seemed to have been born out of nowhere. The scene materializing was one of chaos and destruction, a land of dark green fire and shattering volcanoes. eerily reminiscent of his own dimension of the damned. It was a twisted tableau of hellish proportions, a vision of damnation that sent a shiver of foreboding through his very soul. Suddenly, Asher felt an ethereal tug, as though invisible hands had hoisted him from the fiery landscape. He was soaring through the infernal sky, the scorching heat and acrid smoke replaced by an inexplicable coolness. It was then that he heard it, a voice, gruff and weary with the weight of countless years, its tone laced with a sorrow that cut deeper than any physical wound. "Forgive me for doing this," the voice rumbled, laden with regret and an undercurrent of resentment and grim determination, "but I won't let you get condemned to eternal damnation like me." The words hung in the air, a chilling sentence that instilled a sense of unease in Asher's heart. Who was this man, and why did he speak of damnation? As if in response to his confusion, the image shattered, the hellish landscape and the mysterious voice dissolving into the blackness. A blink later, Asher found himself being gradually pulled from the depths of unconsciousness, the darkness receding like a receding tide. His eyelids felt heavy as he struggled to lift them, the world around him coming into focus in blurry patches. The transition from the terrifying scene to the tangible reality left him disoriented, yet filled with an inexplicable sense of dread and anticipation. He couldn't shake off the disturbing premonition that the dream had left behind, its cryptic message echoing ominously in his still throbbing head. Bleary-eyed and disoriented, Asher blinked against the familiar darkness of his royal chamber as the bright rays of the dark sun made its way through the large windows. How could it be morning already? Confusion threaded through his weary mind. The last thing he recalled was talking to Isola in the gloaming pavilion, and now he was here, in his own room, on his own bed. How had he ended up here? As if summoned by his thoughts, a voice broke through his confusion. "Asher." Rowena's voice held a note of worry as her face swam into his vision. The strange dream he had still lingered in his mind like an afterthought. "Rowena." He managed to croak out her name, his voice rough and dry. As he made an attempt to sit up, a wave of dizziness crashed over him. Rowena was quick to react, her arm slipping around his back to steady him, her touch firm yet gentle. "You should know better than to be so reckless with your life," Rowena chided him, the sternness of her tone softened by the concern etched on her face. "I didn't realize," Asher defended weakly, shrugging lightly. "I felt fine or I thought I was a broken bar." Asher remembered how his HP was stable and wasn't decreasing. Rowena shook her head, a silent reprimand. "You should heed my warnings next time. The siphoning of your blood force was more serious than even I anticipated." Guilt flashed across her face, briefly replacing her usually cool expression. "I thought my blood energy would keep you stable longer. But that kraken, it took more than it should have. I'm sorry." Asher raised his hand, silencing her tirade of worry. "You can scold me as you like, I know I messed up." The sternness on Rowena's face softened, giving way to a more gentle expression. "I'm not angry at you, Asher," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared. Since this war began, I've felt close to losing you a few times. Even though I know you mean well, I can't stand that feeling." As her words hung in the air, Asher shifted, his arm snaking around her soft waist, drawing her closer. "I know and I'm really sorry," he murmured again, the words heavy with determination. "I promise I won't be so careless anymore." And with that, he leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her glistening soft lips, a silent way to reassure her, though he indeed decided to not be so careless anymore. The gentle exchange of their morning kiss soon began to evolve into something deeper, more passionate. The taste of her, the soft sighs she made as he deepened the kiss stirred an all too familiar heat in him. Asher was tempted to lose himself in the intoxicating feel of her, blaming it on his morning libido. However, Rowena was the first to pull away, her face slightly flushed, her eyes sparkling with suppressed desire. "I have to go, Ash," she said softly, her voice shaky. "I am going to talk with Maraxa soon." A hint of disappointment flashed through Asher's eyes, but he understood. He nodded, though not before insisting, "I'm coming with you." There was a flicker of hesitation in Rowena's eyes. She knew of his weakened condition, but he was adamant, and she saw the stubborn resolve in his eyes. "Fine," she conceded, her voice carrying a note of worry. "But you must be careful, you might not be able to use your mana. It's a side effect of having your blood force siphoned." His eyes widened in surprise. "Damn, a broken bar, when can I use it again?" he asked, the concern clear in his voice. Rowena sighed, her gaze softening. "I don't know exactly, it could be a few days or weeks," she admitted, "but once you're fully healed, you'll be fine." Asher felt it was a bummer, though he thought that he could focus on building his influence and learn more about these umbral fiends in the meantime. "We can leave whenever you are ready." With that, Rowena stood, her eyes lingering on Asher for a moment longer before she turned to leave. Just as Rowena left, the door opened again, revealing Marina, who came in and deeply bowed, concern etched on her face. "Master, I hope you are feeling better." Asher's expression turned serious. "Marina," he began, "what exactly happened after I collapsed?" Marina slowly raised her gaze to meet Asher's. "I solo alerted me when you collapsed, Master," she informed him, a hint of awe in her voice. "The royal physician was surprised at your condition. He expected it to be worse. It seems I solo might have saved your life." Asher chuckled, his eyes narrowing. "I solo, huh?" He mulled over the information. Marina added softly with a hint of hesitation, "I know she is still our enemy in a way, but she seems to be a nice girl, Master." He shrugged, a knowing smile on his lips. "Perhaps, but don't be quick to judge anyone, Marina." Asher's words were a reminder, a lesson from his own life, though Marina had no idea of it. And then, switching the mood entirely, he gestured towards his lower body, a playful smirk on his face. "Now, it's time for you to be nice to my little friend down there." "Why yes, Master." Marina's cheeks flushed with a rich reddish hue as she nodded and walked over to him and kneeled before his angry, caged dragon, and what followed was the sound of sinful moans and grunts. Perched atop the west battlement of the Demonstone Castle, Isola was a silhouette against the red daylight as her glowing white hair danced in the air. Her gaze, awash with curiosity, swept across the landscape that unfolded before her. She drank in the scene of the bustling towns, their cobblestone streets teeming with a multitude of races, all cohabiting in an unusual harmony. From the towering minotaurs to weak goblins, every individual had a place here in the Bloodburn Kingdom. Her entire life, she had been cloistered in the aquatic darkness, and the vibrant surface world was an enticing mystery she couldn't resist unraveling. The customs and mannerisms of the land-dwelling folks were a captivating spectacle, an enthralling dance of cultural nuances. Some facets seemed eerily familiar, mirroring the societal practices she was accustomed to in the depths of the ocean. Yet, the majority were alien, intriguing, and entirely captivating. Just as she expected, it was a different world above the seas. Her people's history painted a starkly different picture of the Bloodburn Kingdom, a land of chaos, bloodshed, and perpetual discord. But the reality before her eyes contradicted those tales. Could the passage of thousands of years have softened the edges of this once ruthless kingdom, or had her ancestors' accounts been tainted with bias and resentment? Lost in her musings, Isola barely registered the rhythmic thud of footsteps echoing on the stone walkway behind her. A sense of familiarity washed over her, her fins flinching instinctively. "Ah, if it isn't the princess!" Asher's voice broke through her reverie. Isola put on a guarded expression, her eyebrows pulling together as Asher's voice pierced the tranquil silence. He approached her with an easy gait, a playful grin adorning his face. "Here, I thought you'd be enjoying the pool in your room instead of standing out here in the heat," Asher said as he leaned against the parapet while standing beside her. She drew a slow, sharp breath, the crisp air filling her lungs, her gaze still avoiding him. "I didn't expect to see you up and about so soon," she countered, her voice carrying a hint of accusation. "And just because I hail from the darkness of the sea, doesn't mean I'm fond of spending all my time submerged." Her eyes became distant with a hint of wistfulness as she continued, "It's time to finally explore the outside world." Asher simply nodded, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. "You'll have plenty of time to explore it now," he remarked casually. His gaze then turned sharper, eyes piercing into her with an intensity that made her take a quick glance at him through her peripheral vision. "But I'm curious. Why did you save me?" The question hung in the air, a sudden intrusion into their conversation. Isola felt a surge of surprise, but she masked it well, her face as calm as the still ocean surface. Eth section eth 1/4 eth macron eth squared eth superscript 1 eth negation eth dot eth tm currency eth. As she tilted her head slightly, her long hair swaying gently in the morning breeze, her eyes taking a quick glance at him before looking away. "Don't misunderstand," she said, her voice steady, "I didn't do it for you, I did it for the sake of my people. I wouldn't want their fate to be in the hands of someone worse than you." Asher's chuckle echoed against the stone walls of the battlement, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "You made a good judgment there, princess," he responded while seeing how the reason was just as he expected. Isola turned her gaze back towards the horizon, her voice softening. "There's another reason, too," she murmured, her tone barely above a whisper. "For the sake of the baby kraken, I am sure you haven't forgotten the fact that she has imprinted on you too." Asher gave a non-committal shrug, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. "Why does that matter?" His question held a hint of genuine confusion, his experience with companionship of beasts and monsters practically non-existent. He never found the need to have one. Isola sighed, a tired, weary sound that seemed to echo her inner turmoil, wondering if he was messing with her or that he genuinely doesn't know. However, remembering that Asher had only woken up from his mysterious soulless state not too long ago, she felt it must be the latter. Her voice held a firmness that commanded attention as she explained, "When a being imprints on someone, it's an absolute trust, an unwavering love. If they have to, they would follow that person to even the place of no return like Tartarus. Given that the baby kraken's mother died because of you, we are, in a sense, its parents even if we aren't technically. It's a newborn, and it needs both of us just like any other baby. If it loses connection with one of us, it would be devastating for its mental development, possibly even fatal." Asher was taken aback by the intensity of Isola's explanation, the depth of the imprinting process far surpassing his initial assumptions. Isola, catching the shadow of doubt flickering in his eyes, added with a firm, determined tone, "You can't take this lightly. We need to visit the baby kraken every day and bond with her. Even if you refuse to come, at least let me see it. Consider it a favor for saving your life." A soft chuckle escaped Asher's lips. "I didn't exactly ask you to save me, princess," he pointed out, a teasing glint in his eyes that made Isola's hands clench into fists. How could he be so flippant, so ungrateful? Before she could voice her frustration, however, Asher's voice cut through her brewing tensed mind. "Relax," he said, his tone mellowing. "I was already planning on visiting the Nyadon tribe daily, to keep an eye on your people, and to help create a path for us to coexist." Asher already had planned to make himself quite familiar with the baby kraken so that when it grows up, he can make good use of it. He didn't know what he was supposed to do exactly, but he was ready to follow Isola's lead. A wave of relief washed over Isola, softening her rigid stance. Perhaps she had been too quick to worry. She looked at Asher, her resolve hardening, and couldn't help but feel that he seemed to have a knack for tricking her too easily. She warned herself again to be extra mindful whenever he talked. However, since she was worried that the baby kraken was highly dependent on someone like him, she was determined to make him understand the value of the precious life that had imprinted on them, to make him understand how the baby kraken was more than just a potential weapon. Then maybe he won't try to take advantage of it. "By the way, I was meaning to ask you a broken bar," Asher began, his gaze still fixed on her. "Do you enjoy singing? Does your power come from your voice?" His tone held a hint of curiosity, a recollection of her voice echoing in his mind during their ordeal in the belly of the kraken. It was a trait that suggested she possessed the will-bending pathway with a specialization in the rare and powerful mind force abilities. He also remembered the strange dream he had that was still tugging at him in a way. It was the first time he ever had such a dream that felt real yet so distant. Isola nodded slowly, her brows knitting together. "Why are you asking if you already know?" she challenged. a hint of defensiveness lining her voice. Asher's brows furrowed, his gaze finally shifting to meet hers. Because your people shouldn't possess such abilities, yet you do. You're the only umbral fiend I've seen with these powers, and even your appearance deviates from the norm in some ways. He pointed out, his tone carrying a note of intrigue. Isola's gaze slid away from his. I know I look a bit different, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, but it is just a mutation of my bloodline and nothing else, she said as she kept shifting her gaze. Asher chuckled inwardly, her evasion transparent. Clearly, she was uncomfortable sharing more and was so bad at lying, but it was not like he cared about it much to dig into it. All he cared about was the potential he saw in her voice, in her powerful mind abilities. He had a feeling that even Isola herself had not yet fully grasped the extent of her powers. He then reached out, tapping lightly on the sky blue fin protruding from the side of her head. Come with me, he said, his tone light-hearted yet firm. We're going to visit your father, princess. Isola suddenly flinched, making her purse her lips at the contact with her fin, clearly not appreciating his teasing, but at the mention of visiting her father, her face lit up. Her previous annoyance forgotten, she nodded, falling into step beside him, eager to see her parents and her people finally, though she felt like telling him, you can stop calling me princess. By the way, she felt he was doing it to rub on her wounds since her status and title was stripped away. Sure, princess. Not even the devils can save you. In the shadowy recesses of the chilling Dreadthorn Castle, the meeting hall echoed with the frustrated sigh of a woman, her ravishing beauty illuminating the somber darkness. Clad in an elegant black gown that enhanced her ample curves, Rebecca paced the cold, stone floor, her ruby lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure. Intricate chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, their flickering light casting an eerie dance of shadows across the room. A full 10 minutes had passed since her arrival, and yet, she was left waiting. The audacity of such disrespect stirred a dangerous fire in her heart, yet also a hidden tension. She was on the brink of walking away, unwilling to endure this further, when the large iron doors creaked open, disrupting her indignant thoughts. The mature woman clad in a dark blue gown who entered was beautiful, though not standing out as much as the other woman in the hall. Still, her icy gaze was as sharp as a freshly honed blade, boring into Rebecca. Esther stepped into the room, the doors closing behind her with an ominous thud. Sister, Rebecca began, her arms crossed over her chest, her voice echoing in the large hall. What is the meaning of this? Esther advanced, her footsteps echoing ominously against the stone floor, her gaze never wavering from Rebecca's irked gaze. Her response, when it came, was as chilly as her demeanor. Why ask a question to which you already know the answer? She retorted sternly, making Rebecca narrow her eyes. A frown creased Rebecca's flawless forehead as she retorted, I didn't come all the way here to endure this inanity. Determination set in her ruby lips, she pivoted on her heel, ready to storm out of the insufferable place, but her motion was thwarted as Esther's hand shot out, her grip firm on Rebecca's wrist, yanking her back. You do not walk away when I'm speaking, she commanded, her voice echoing in the vast chamber, the stern tone brooking no argument. Rebecca scoffed, her gaze defiant. Just because you're my elder sister, doesn't mean you can dictate what I can or cannot do. Not anymore. I am stronger and not answerable to you, she bit back, her chin tilted in a display of audacious pride. Esther's face remained a mask of icy composure. Strength matters not when it comes to the affairs of our house, she countered, then dropped a name that made Rebecca stiffen. Do you really want Thorin to get involved? With a reluctant sigh, Rebecca relaxed her stance upon hearing her eldest brother's name, her protest mellowing into a grumble. Fine, say what you want. I don't want you people eating my head later because I didn't listen. Esther released her grip, her gaze locked onto Rebecca's. Since we were children, you've been a rebel, she began, her voice echoing the truth of her words. You've cared little for our parents' wishes, for the welfare of our house. All that mattered to you were your own interests. Rebecca's scoff echoed around the room. Don't pretend to understand me, Esther. Being my sister doesn't give you the right to judge my life. I don't care to understand, Esther retorted coldly. We all have our crosses to bear. What I do care about is if you risk the reputation or safety of our house. The recent war cost us prestige and resources. Thorin had to apologize publicly for the treachery of his vassals and compensate the people with 5 years' worth of our resources. The loss of the Kraken is an entirely different level of disaster. So, why are you telling me all this as if I am the reason for all this? It's not like you people were the only ones who suffered losses, Rebecca said with a click of her tongue. Esther furrowed her brows and said, apparently, the reason this war came to fruition was that a representative from the Umberolfians had been staying in contact with the traitors for months or maybe more than a year, planning everything, including inciting a rebellion and learning about our weaknesses. But do you know what the strange part is? Rebecca squinted her eyes as Esther continued. No Umberolfian can enter our lands without our knowledge, nor can they even get to the Kraken and free it from our hold without us knowing unless a broken bar somebody helped them. Rebecca rolled her eyes as she said, obviously, it was the traitors who are pretty dead by now. Esther shook her head as she said with a steely gaze, don't play dumb with me. None of the other houses in this kingdom knows the secrets of our lands other than those in this house. Rebecca scoffed as she said, then your son, who got himself in trouble, might have something to say about that. Esther's expression didn't change despite Rebecca's hidden accusation. Not even Thorin knows you as well as I do, especially since you have always competed with me ever since we were young. We trained and learned everything together, and that is why I know you always let your emotions get the better of you, especially now with your son in a coma and Asher, who foiled all your plans for Reborn, still walking around and getting stronger by the day. All this must have surely tempted you to do something. Rebecca shot her sister a venomous glare as she interrupted. I have no idea what you're prattling on about, and I don't care to stay and find out, she snapped, her voice echoing in the hall, and don't forget, I am no longer a thorn, I'm a drake. As Rebecca stormed away, Esther's cold voice followed her. You may change your name, but you can never change the blood that runs in your veins. Rebecca, diaresis eth squared superscript 1 eth macron dot degrees diaresis superscript O. Then more the reason you should know not to dig for answers to the wrong questions, sister, for the sake of our house, Rebecca said with a cold smirk as she walked away. The silence that followed Rebecca's departure was as heavy as the words that had been spoken as Esther stared at the door with a frown. Morning light kissed the face of the northern lands, casting long shadows across the remnants of destruction, a stark reminder of the war that had ravaged the region. The inhabitants of these cold, rugged territories were yet nursing their wounds, the echoes of chaos still ringing in their ears, but, like the resilient flora that clung to the rocky terrain, they too were steadily regaining their footing, fortified by the strong support from House Thorn. However, the gnawing void of their losses was a constant companion, a phantom pain that the balm of time would slowly soothe, or so they hoped. Voices of dissent and resentment whispered through the crowds. Some held the Umberolfians accountable, their eyes dark with loathing for the people they considered pawns in a brutal game. Others simmered with anger towards the Sea People for initiating a war that had cost them so dearly. Yet, despite the bitterness that tainted their words, none dared to venture close to the Nyadon tribe, where the Umberolfians had taken temporary residence. The Nyadon tribe's abode was a sanctuary, a safe haven for the displaced Umberolfians as they began the arduous task of building their new underwater home. The tribe, large in number but constrained in space on their land, had graciously permitted the Umberolfians to create a new home in the nearby seas. It was a wise way to avoid any further sparks of conflict that could fan the smoldering embers of resentment into a destructive blaze, while using them to make the lives of the people of the Nyadon tribe easier by gathering resources and whatnot. For the Nyadon people, the war was a distant thunderstorm, its destruction skirting their borders due to a combination of luck and the efforts of the royal consort. Their stance towards the Umberolfians was neutral, a delicate balance maintained through a combination of diplomacy and restraint, and also respect for the royal consort's decision. Meanwhile, the Umberolfians nursed their grief and shame in silence. The loss of their kingdom was a wound that bled invisibly, staining their hearts with sorrow. Their beloved king and queen no longer held any title but were reduced to common status while all of them were at the mercy of their enemies. Yet the promise of a life free from the darkness and the constant threat of the cursed wraiths was the only source of relief from all this. It was a new dawn, a second chance that urged them to swallow their indignation and bow their heads in acceptance. The war might have been lost, but life was theirs to live, one day at a time. As the morning progressed, an unusual stirring in the sky seized everyone's attention. The thick canopy of dark clouds parted abruptly, unveiling the majestic form of a dragon, Flowerless. Her 50-meter-long body, painted in hues of dark red, sliced through the air, casting a gigantic shadow over the land below. Her descent was marked by a collective gasp from the onlookers, their eyes riveted to the spectacle unfolding above them. The people of the Naiadon tribe and the Umberolfians made way instantly, their movements a well-orchestrated dance of respect, fear and anticipation. At the forefront of the crowd, Neron, the Naiadon chief, emerged. His heart pounded in sync with the rhythmic beat of the dragon's wings. His gaze locked onto the royal couple, and the Umberolfian emissary perched atop the mighty creature. He fell to his knees, his head bowed in deference. His tribe followed suit, their bodies pressing against the earth in a unified show of loyalty and respect. A murmur of reluctance rolled through the gathered Umberolfians as they, too, dropped to their knees. Their faces were masks of suppressed resentment, their pride stinging from the forced display of submission. Yet, as their eyes fell upon their princess, their expressions softened, replaced with a palpable sense of relief. There she was, their princess, whole and unharmed, a beacon of hope in their sea of uncertainties. However, their hearts still harbored a shadow of worry. Was their princess truly safe amidst the enemy? Were appearances deceiving? Their shared apprehension hung in the air, a silent question that echoed in their minds. Isola's sapphire blue eyes wandered restlessly across the sea of faces. As her gaze fell upon the gathering of her people, their well-being brought an unspoken relief to her heart despite the circumstances. At least they seemed to do better than she expected in this land. However, a significant absence made itself known. Her parents were nowhere to be seen. Her heart fluttered with a pang of worry. Just as her anxiety began to crest, the sonorous song of shifting waves drew her attention towards the sea. The rhythmic dance of the water parted to reveal two familiar figures, one having a powerful while the other having a slender, lithe form emerging from the ocean's depths followed by some of her people behind them. The sight of her parents instantly brought a rush of warmth to her heart. Meraxa's eyes, as deep and dark as the sea he hailed from, widened in surprise and relief. His gaze was a mirror of his daughter's, reflecting the same profound relief and love. The sight of Isola safe and sound comforted his worried heart. Without a second thought, Isola leapt from the towering form of Flowerless, her lithe figure cutting through the air as she landed gracefully on the shore. With the urgency of a rushing tide, she eagerly walked towards her parents, her heart pounding in her chest. Her fins fluttered in the breeze, mimicking her heightened emotions. Asher shook his head as he jumped down from Flowerless as well. He knew Rowena would have summoned Meraxa to come to her castle if not for the fact that she had business here to oversee personally. At the same time, she wanted to come with him and see how the Umberolfians were settling down and if they were causing any trouble. However, Rowena furrowed her brows upon noticing that the baby kraken was still nowhere to be seen. Shouldn't it be showing itself upon sensing Asher and Isola's presence? Under a sky scattered with clouds and flying beasts, Isola found herself hurtling towards her parents with an urgency she hadn't known she possessed. As if mirrored in a dance, they too moved forward, splashes of salt water trailing behind them. They all stopped abruptly, just at the edge of where land met the sea, where their two worlds collided. "My child," Meraxa began, his voice etched with worry, only to be cut off as they both tried to speak at the same time. A hint of a smile traced his lips as Isola motioned her father to proceed. He began, taking a deep breath, "I trust you are well. They haven't been harsh with you?" His gaze swept over her, seeking any signs of distress or harm. Isola met her father's anxious gaze with a soft, reassuring smile. "No, father. They've been treating me better than I expected." She also wanted to say how the two-faced consort does like to get on her nerves, but she didn't want her father to misunderstand and get worried. Merax's eyes widened, the lines of worry around them softening. "Really?" His voice was tinged with surprise and doubt, but her expression told him that it was indeed true and made him feel somewhat unburdened. The fact that his daughter still has so much concern and love for him and their people despite making her life miserable made his eyes glisten and his heart heavy, letting him yet again realize how lucky he was to have her as his daughter. But this only made him even more determined to not let go of his final chance to make things right. "How have you been, father? How are our people doing?" Isolo asked with her lips firmly pressed together. Even if only a night had passed, she was worried. Meraxa let out a soft sigh as he said with a complicated look, "Our General Viraxa is still healing after almost dying in battle, though the rest of us have been doing better than expected. Buta broken bar, we don't know how long this will last or what plans they have for us. Their queen is already here, and we might get an idea after I talk with her." Isola nodded with a wince, praying for things to be all right. She then turned her attention towards her mother as she asked, "Mother, a broken bar, how have you been faring?" Narisara, who had been silent all this while, merely nodded her head in response. "You don't have to worry about me, child," she said in her usual cold voice, before she turned on her heel and made her way back towards the sea, leaving a wake of awkward silence behind her. Meraxi cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Give her some time, Isola. This is new for all of us. We're just trying to adjust after losing our kingdom, mourning our dead, and preparing for the worst." His voice was soft, a hint of melancholy threading his words as he watched his wife disappear into the waves. Isola nodded softly, but then a troubled shadow cast on her usual calm demeanor as she noticed that the baby kraken had still not showed up. She felt it should have come out to see her upon sensing her presence. She was just about to voice her concerns when, "Meraxa, where is the baby kraken?" Asha preempted her, coming up behind her to address Meraxa. At this, Meraxa's visage darkened, a wrinkle of unease appearing on his stoic facade. "I meant to tell you both, since you left. It's been acting odd," he replied, his gaze fleeting over the shimmering waves as if he was trying to seek out something within the sea. Novluethsofs.co.th. Isola's eyes blinked, her worry lines deepening. It was Asha, though, who asked the looming question, "What happened?" Drawing a deep breath, Meraxa began explaining their plight. "After you two left and the sun had set, it suddenly came out of the sea and became restless and agitated, refusing to submerge and rest as it should. It just kept crying for you two, and we tried to reach you both, but our messages had been unceremoniously halted, dismissed as unimportant. With no other choice, we tried to persuade the baby to return to the comforting depth of the sea, to no avail." Isola's eyes had a pained look hearing how that poor thing must have been in distress for some reason, and she wasn't there to comfort it. "Where is it now?" Asha asked with a narrowed gaze. Meraxa sighed as he revealed, "When the sun rose, it disappeared back into the sea. Since it didn't come out for so long, we decided to go in there and see if it was all right, but it seems it is highly upset and is hiding from us." Isola, hearing this, her brows knotted in consternation. Asha had a look of disbelief as he questioned, "How hard can it be to find such a huge baby?" Meraxa merely scoffed softly in response with a hint of pride. "You are underestimating the capabilities of a kraken even if it's a newborn. Its innate bloodline memories would allow it to traverse the deep seas with an adeptness of the collective knowledge of its ancestors. It knows places which even we don't." Isola, on the other hand, was lost in her thoughts, her guilt painting a sorrowful picture on her face. The thought of the baby kraken feeling upset and abandoned by her and Asha tugged at her heartstrings. Unwilling to let it suffer any longer, she voiced her decision, "I will coax it to come back." Asha felt that Isola would handle this situation. He then turned towards Meraxa, his voice resolute. "My wife is waiting, Meraxa," he stated, the implication of his words hanging heavily between them. It's time. We talked about some things of great interest. He felt he had to be present in this meeting since he could miss up on any important stuff. Isola briefly caught his gaze, her eyes reflecting a hint of disappointment. She knew she shouldn't have expected him to show any concern for the poor baby kraken. At this, Meraxa nodded, turning to Isola with a reassuring smile, his voice gentle yet firm. "Don't worry," he told her, "the baby kraken will listen to you." Soon after, in the humble structure of the Whispering Cove, a building Neron had once built for Asher's important meetings, 3 individuals gathered in a clandestine meeting. It was a hushed echo of regality, the hall that usually buzzed with the collective voices of Asher's vassals now resonating with an intense silence. Meraxa, Rowena, and Asher found themselves in a symmetrical configuration, Asher at the helm with Rowena and Meraxa facing each other on either side. Breaking the silence, Meraxa gestured with his hand, a hint of resignation in his voice as he invited Rowena to begin. "What is it that you wish to know, Your Majesty?" Rowena folded her arms onto the table, leaning forward with her eyes narrowing into slits. Her voice, steady and cautious, cut through the dense quiet. "How did you and your people break the seal that the Ravager had used to banish you all?" Meraxa shook his head, a gentle movement that stirred the quiet around them. "I wish I knew the answer too," he began, his voice carrying a trace of bewilderment, "but the truth is, we're just as in the dark as you are. One day, one of our scouts simply informed us they'd managed to swim upwards until they saw a sliver of light piercing the ocean's surface. Not even we believed it until I personally made sure of it, but we couldn't dare take risks swimming up lest your people sense our presence." His eyes glazed over with nostalgia as he added, "I can still remember the celebration we had that day, the outpouring of joy and relief. We thanked the devils for our deliverance since they must have weakened the seals somehow, even though it hadn't yet been 10,000 years." Rowena and Asher exchanged a look, a silent conversation transpiring in the brief meeting of their eyes. However, a curt nod from Asher quelled any lingering doubts, corroborating Meraxa's account. After all, this tale was not new to him. He had heard it from Isola as well. With a soft hum of contemplation, Rowena acknowledged Meraxa's account before her voice slithered through the silence once more. "Who was it that connected you to the traitors within our borders? How did you get to the Kraken without House Thorn's knowledge?" Meraxa repeated the gesture of denial, his head shaking in genuine puzzlement. "Again, it is a mystery that escapes my understanding. Cryptic messages were sent to us, detailing where and when to meet these lords. As for me, I dispatched a representative to negotiate with them, to plan how we could infiltrate your kingdom and weaken it from within," he explained, the barest hint of regret edging his voice. "We were desperate for any aid to win the war and didn't bother investigating who was helping us and risk losing our only opportunity to survive." Rowena's sigh resonated in the stillness, an echo of disappointment that bounced off the walls of the Whispering Cove. Yet another dead end. Meraxa had no reason to protect the instigator any longer, and so she didn't doubt his words. Asher's brows furrowed in thought, his gaze unfocused as he mulled over the information, attempting to piece together this perplexing puzzle. The notion of anyone orchestrating these covert affairs under the very nose of House Thorn seemed preposterous. Could the traitor be within their ranks? He swiftly dismissed the idea. They wouldn't cut off their own legs. But suddenly, a fleeting image of Rebecca passed through his mind, making his brows raise. This was something he had wondered about earlier but dismissed it since he didn't know if Rebecca was that crazy to go that far. Still, thinking about it again, he couldn't think of anyone else other than Rebecca. But what concerned him even more was that she must have had some help for sure to destroy the seal. It surely wasn't the bloody devils that helped these people. However, without solid proof, it was just an unsupported conjecture, though he realized that she could be more dangerous than he thought if she was really behind all this. "How did you and your kind manage to survive for millennia, with your numbers and your strength seemingly strong for a race that had been banished to die? It just seems impossible." Rowena's words bore into the silence, echoing a question that had been gnawing at Asher's mind as well. Any person's strength was inextricably linked to their quests, and to survive in the forbidden waters, One needs to have strength far higher than the average. Banishment would mean a lack of quests, and consequently, a stunting of their growth. It wouldn't even be a surprise if the umbral fiends has become extinct within 500 years, yet they survived for a staggering 7,000 years. The umbral fiends before them now were evidence to the contrary, their strength evidently not too diminished by their lengthy exile. Upon hearing her question, Merax's eyes became distant before he glanced at the two of them. Under the calm yet tense ambience of the Whispering Cove, Meraxa began to retell the old tale that had been passed down through generations, steeped in the trials and tribulations of his ancestors. Before the wrath of the Ravager, Meraxa's voice was a solemn whisper, echoing within the cove. We were in the hundreds of millions, but once he decided that he wanted everything we had, he massacred us till our numbers were reduced to a mere fraction, 1,000,000. The only reason he didn't annihilate us and banished us was to satiate his own malicious delight. Meraxa's hands were clenched as even now his veins would rumble whenever he remembered this tragic and cruel tale from history. Rowena and Asher exchanged glances but didn't interrupt Meraxa. There was no point in arguing which history was wrong and right in a meeting like this. Meraxa's expression turned solemn as he continued, "Yet, my ancestors realized the hard way that their suffering had far from ended once they were banished and trapped in the forbidden waters, where they couldn't even do any quests to strengthen themselves nor get any resources, especially life crystals." Asher and Rowena keenly listened as his words painted a vivid, horrifying picture of a shadowed world filled with insatiable creatures of the abyss, the cursed wraiths, that feasted on their despair and dwindling population. The once mighty umbral fiends, unaccustomed to the lightless depths of the forbidden waters, found themselves on the brink of extinction within a century or two, which was far lesser than what Asher and Rowena expected. It seemed as if the cursed wraiths were surely quite terrifying to corner an entire race. They had never seen them since the cursed wraiths don't leave the forbidden waters, but the ancient tales they knew were enough to know that these waters came to be named so because of these creatures that only know blood and death. This was the very reason why since the birth of the Bloodburn Kingdom, nobody dared to venture deep into the seas where the waters were not only chaotic but something far danger lived beneath those waters. Meraxa sighed as he continued, in their desperate fight for survival, the experts among them decided to split, sending their most powerful off in search of safe refuge. Almost all of them perished, never to be heard of again, Meraxa said, his voice heavy with shared sorrow. But one among us found something extraordinary. Asher, captivated by the story, leaned forward in anticipation, his gaze intently focused on Meraxa. "What did your ancestor find?" he queried, a palpable wave of intrigue radiating off him. "My ancestor stumbled upon a cave of unfathomable darkness, and in that cave via broken bar he found the last remnants of two devils, the very transcendental beings who keep our realm alive," Meraxa said as his eyes rippled. "You can't be serious." A broken bar, Asher mumbled with a skeptical look while Rowena raised her brows as her gaze kept flickering, her mind racing with thoughts. Meraxa gave a blank stare at Asher to show that he wasn't spouting nonsense, making Asher shake his head and say, "I know devils and angels exist, but they never physically show themselves in our realm. Even the Chamber of Hell only manifests a part of their spirit and not their true selves. So what made your ancestor think two devils were physically buried there?" Asher also knew the folktales and stories in this realm talk about devils appearing here in ancient times, but there was never any proof. FTM pound FTM currency apostrophe FTMS FTM inverted exclamation mark FTM superscript A apostrophe FTM dot FTM FTM currency FTM since he felt that, for some reason, they just thought it was beneath them to appear here. Meraxa didn't take offense that Asher was finding this as nonsense. "Still," he answered, "because there were no mortal remains in that tomb," Meraxa began, his voice resonating through the cavernous chamber. "As per my ancestor, the vestiges of an ancient, powerful presence clung to the very air within the cavern. The echo of souls long past held the cave in an ethereal grip." Meraxa's eyes became distant, the dim light of the chamber flickering in their depths. The spectral remains whispered a greeting to our ancestor, acknowledging his arrival as if it had been foreseen. They spoke of their master who had patiently waited, affirming that their life essence would serve as a beacon to guide us through the darkness. It's like they sacrificed whatever was left of them so that we could survive, he continued, his words lingering in the air, imbued with a sense of sadness, awe and mysticism. A heavy pause hung in the room as Asher and Rowena digested the profound revelation, their gazes fixed on Meraxa with unmasked intrigue. They didn't say anything anymore and were forever gone. Our ancestor then ventured deeper into the bowels of the cave. Meraxa proceeded, his hand waved gracefully as he conjured dark mana that took the form of a mystical fountain, to show this imagery to the two. There, nestled in the womb of the cave, he discovered a fountain pulsating with a fluid that did not belong to our mortal world, a pool of divine essence that he named as the elixir of the ancients. He paused, his gaze sharp on Asher and Rowena. Just a single drop of this miraculous substance was enough to sustain him for years, to embolden his strength beyond what he had ever known, and to give him the ability to see through the darkness, he said, the gravity of his words echoing around the room, a hint of awe glowing in his eyes. Our ancestor also learned that, for some reason, the cursed wraiths never approached this cave. He even tried luring one to it, but it ran away. This made him realize the place surrounding the cave would be a safe haven for us, a sign of the two devils still protecting us. Meraxa explained further, hence, it was decided that this cave, this hallowed ground that held the key to our survival, would become the cornerstone of our new world, the birthplace of our resurgence. So this elixir sustained hundreds of thousands of your people for thousands of years. Asher asked with a baffled look before turning to Rowena. Is something like this possible? Asher knew Rowena would have a deeper knowledge about the history of this realm and about devils since he still had a lot to learn about them. Rowena finally broke her lingering silence, a single word escaping her lips, dropped into the air like a coin in a wishing well, a devia. Asher had encountered the term before. A devia was an ancient item, an anomaly of sorts, wherein an object of any form harbored a mere fraction of a devil's immense power. Nobody knows how they exactly came to existence, while some say they came to form upon the birth of this realm or that the devils themselves left a tiny fraction of their powers here and there to help them, but nobody knows for sure whether any of this was true. These mystical treasures held the capacity to endow a person with unfathomable strength, all without the pursuit of perilous quests. The human world also had its own version, named Reborn, carrying a sliver of an angel's power. However, these artifacts were as scarce as they were potent. One could count the known ones on their fingers. These powerful relics were sought after with a fervor that bordered on obsession, seen by many as a shortcut to acquiring immense power. Their rarity only fueled the desperate yearning for them, positioning them as unparalleled treasures in the quest for power. These did not bestow instant power. The energy within had to be absorbed gradually, and that came with the inherent risk of death. The notion of instant power had allured many, only for them to be met with a fatal end in their attempt to harness the overwhelming energy within these objects. The iconic Bloodburn Stone of House Drake was a well-known devia. Asher's mind was drawn to Erna's shocked face upon her discovery that Rowena had fully absorbed the power of the Bloodburn Stone in a staggeringly short span of time, an unprecedented feat. The question that puzzled Asher was the nature of devias and redems. The energy they harbored was so minuscule that it could only be contained within one person at a time. On the demise of its possessor, the energy was believed to magically return to its source. This must have been how Rowena was able to utilize the Bloodburn Stone after the passing of her father, but it doesn't answer how so many Umbralthians were able to make use of a devia for so many centuries, though this was the first time he was hearing one that was in the form of an elixir. Rowena continued as she looked at Asher, a devia like the one my house possess surely cannot be compared to this elixir of the ancients. She glanced at Meraxa as she continued with a hint of fascination in her eyes. If what he is saying is true, then this is far more powerful than just the devia we know. I don't know if we could even call it one, since this elixir is nothing but the blood of devils themselves. Just a drop of it could bestow great power and new abilities, while the combined essence of the two let an entire race survive for thousands of years. Asher slowly nodded with a distant gaze, feeling that the power of the devils was truly unfathomable. Still, coming upon a tomb of two such supreme beings was just too much to process. Apparently, those two devils even had a master, and he couldn't even imagine how strong this master was. Rowena also was finding it hard to believe that Meraxa's ancestor happened upon a tomb of devils, yet she couldn't think of any other way they could have survived, no matter how shocking this was, and this only raised a lot of questions in her head, just like it did in Asher, who wondered how those two devils ended up there and how come such powerful beings died so miserably in the abyssal darkness of the sea, or if they were truly dead, since, in their heads, it was hard to picture these divine beings could die. However, these questions can't possibly be answered by anyone here, so they decided to leave it at that, and, though enlightened, Asher found himself confused by yet another conundrum. Turning his questioning gaze back to Meraxa, he voiced his question. "I can see how the elixir helped you people survive against the cursed wraiths for so long. But how did your people survive so many centuries in this realm without life crystals? Surely, one cannot continually consume the elixir every day? That doesn't seem possible, or am I mistaken?" Meraxa, accepting the validity of Asher's question, proceeded to nod in agreement. "Indeed, one cannot continually partake of the elixir of the ancients, which was also not infinite in amount. A single drop is the limit. Anything beyond that, and the overwhelming energy would ravage our mortal bodies. Even absorbing that single drop would take great effort and precaution to make sure your body doesn't get destroyed," Meraxa declared, his tone imbued with an echo of reverence for the potent substance. He still could remember the way his body rumbled when he absorbed the drop of the elixir during his younger years. He continued, his eyes glazed, as if reaching back into the annals of his people's history. "But as if the devils themselves had answered our desperate prayers, we began to receive quests limited to the confines of the Forbidden Waters. These quests were called restricted quests. Most of them involved killing the cursed wraiths or gathering of resources from areas fraught with danger. The rewards were far from bountiful, even if the difficulty level was high, yet they provided just enough life crystals for us to sustain our existence and let the weaker ones among us increase their strength slowly without depending on the elixir, since our ancestors knew it would one day dry up. At least this was proof that the devils didn't want our race to be nothing but a memory of broken bar," Meraxa said with a hint of reverence in his eyes. Asher blinked his eyes in surprise. "Restricted quests? And you people gain the rewards by killing creatures living in the same realm as ours? How astonishing!" A broken bar. He turned towards Rowena and asked, "Isn't this similar to how young beasts receive quests within the same world they live in, where they have to kill or get something from a hostile territory?" Asher knew that magical beasts, be it the demon or the human world, do get and take part in quests just like them, some of which do involve only beast versus beast. He did remember killing an adolescent dragon during his life as a hunter, but he never came across any powerful ones since they were multiple times older than him and had no need to take part in quests unless their master wanted them to. If they had one, for instance, a dragon like Floralis was surely at its peak and would take part in quests only if Rowena ordered it to. However, some beasts who innately don't have much intelligence, especially during their young age when they are solely relying on their instincts, only receive quests similar to restricted quests. They keep receiving it until they were intelligent enough to know how to make use of their life crystals to survive and get stronger. When it comes to higher intelligent demons or humans, these quests don't come into play since the mana circuit only fully develops after a few years, whereas most beasts were born with fully developed mana circuits. Rowena nodded to Asher. "Yes, restricted quests are quite unheard of among people like us, but they have been mentioned briefly in our historical records. They usually come into play when someone or a group is forcibly confined to a specific location for a long time without letting them teleport to take any quests." Asher nodded as he realized that this was similar to how Rowena made sure he wouldn't take any quests by sealing off his room the first day he awakened. He knew this was basically done by isolating his room using sealing magic to prevent him from teleporting. A spark of realization ignited in Asher's eyes as he turned towards Miraxa, his words reflecting a newfound understanding. "You and your people's deep-seated loathing for the cursed wraiths is understandable," he began, his voice reverberating in the hallowed space. "Yet, their existence may have inadvertently been a blessing in disguise your ancestors needed to endure. Had the wraiths not been there, the quests might have forced your people into a much crueler predicament, murdering each other for survival. Regardless of whether they chose to participate or not, their fate would have been sealed all the quicker." Asher realized this just now, but this made him wonder why the devils would purposefully put out such cruel quests. What was their objective, or was it that they just had a sadistic nature? Whatever it was, he knew this question was above his league. The implicit suggestion in Asher's words that luck rather than divine intervention had contributed to their survival seemed to strike a dissonant chord in Miraxa, his beliefs firmly entrenched in the benevolence of the devils towards their race. Miraxa could not easily digest this perspective. However, his face remained composed, not revealing the simmering indignation within. He returned Asher's gaze, his voice taking on an uppish, matter-of-fact tone. "One may choose to interpret our survival as they wish," he said, a slight edge in his voice. "However, we firmly believe that we endured and prevailed not out of sheer luck, but because we were favored by the devils themselves. The prophecy of the ancients serves as a sign of their protection, a broken bar, a prophecy written by the master of those devils, etched onto a cold stone in the very same cave. It is still present there even to this day." Hearing Miraxa mention the prophecy, Asher scoffed as his voice held a barely concealed contempt. "The very prophecy that led you to offer up your own child as a sacrifice, for a prediction that never even came to fruition?" His gaze was sharp, cutting through Miraxa's poised facade like a dagger. Not expecting Asher's sudden biting remarks, Rowena's brows knitted in consternation as she noted the subtle yet sharp shift in Asher's aura. Miraxa's eyes fell, the challenge in Asher's tone making his breath hitch in his throat. But Asher wasn't finished. He leaned in, his cold gaze never leaving Miraxa as he continued, "What kind of further does that to their child? Did you condition her as a child, molding her into your perfect sacrificial lamb?" A bitter laugh escaped him as he added, "Even beasts wouldn't be as twisted to do this to their own offspring." Miraxa felt the words hit him like a barrage, each one a piercing strike against his heart. His fists clenched under the table, knuckles turning white from the effort. He wanted to lash out, to refute Asher's mocking words, but the words stuck in his throat. He knew there was some truth in Asher's words, and that realization only made his heart even more heavy. "Did you even love her, or was it all a lie to fool her into doing it? Or maybe a few sentences etched onto a stone was more important to you?" Asher asked, remembering how concerned Miraxa was about Isola's safety. "It wasn't a lie." Miraxa suddenly lashed out as he banged his hand on the table, causing it to shatter into 1,000 pieces, though Miraxa immediately gathered his energy to not let any of the pieces fall on Rowena or Asher since he quickly remembered his situation. He regretted lashing out, but Asher's final sentence just cracked something within him. Even if he had cultivated a lot of patience as a king, this struck him deeply. Rowena's eyes held confusion and worry, taken aback by Asher's suddenly provoking Miraxa and seeing his cold smile. She softly looked at him, indirectly wanting to know if something was wrong. She had rarely seen such a side of his where he suddenly seemed cold, distant, and unfamiliar. The only time she felt this was the day he first woke up. She also was confused, wondering why Asher cared so much about Miraxa's belief in the prophecy. It also seemed that Asher looked down on prophecies, making her not know what to think. Feeling Rowena's gentle touch, Asher snapped back from his simmering rage within him. He turned his gaze to meet her concerned eyes, offering her a soft smile that never fully reached his own. There was an apology in that smile, and a silent reassurance that all was well. Despite the sharp, unexpected words that had just left his lips, he let out a slow, measured sigh, as if releasing the pent-up anger that had momentarily consumed him. Inwardly, He chastised himself for allowing his emotions to take the reins, especially for wanting to see the look on Merax's face after the colossal failure of a prophecy he and his people had so devotedly believed in. This made him realize that he was too eager to see the shocked and regretful faces of the treacherous snakes that had stabbed him in the back in his previous life. Upon finding out he was still alive, he wanted to know how they all, especially Era, would react upon realizing that the prophecy they believed in blindly was all for nothing. This anticipation had, inadvertently, fueled his heated words against Meraxa, but he knew the day of reckoning would have to wait, stowed away in the recesses of his heart for now. Still, Meraxa's reaction gave him a grim satisfaction he never expected to feel. With a swift but noticeable change in demeanor, Meraxa steadied his emotions. "I apologize for my rudeness." He then looked at Asher with a firm yet wistful gaze. "I understand the weight of my actions," he spoke in a resolute tone, "but I have no intention to justify my deeds to anyone, save for my daughter." Asher simply flicked his hand in a nonchalant gesture, his words breezy. "You can forget that I said anything." Asher truly couldn't care about Meraxa's motivations. With the tension in the room dissipating, Rowena decided it was high time to steer the conversation back to practical matters. Her fixed gaze found Meraxa. "Let us move on to how you people are going to offer reparations for starting this war." Meraxa's expression became taut as Rowena continued with a steely gaze. "We have already decided that your people will offer a certain percentage of their collective life crystal earnings to our kingdom to start off. Think of it as a tribute, a recompense for the protection and stability we offer, but don't forget we will set a minimum target of certain life crystals you and your people should collect. We won't entertain any excuses or complaints." Rowena spoke with an authority that left no room for argument. Asher watched the unfolding scene with a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He knew well that this move would expedite the recovery of their kingdom's losses and help rebuild their strength, especially with all these numbers of a powerful race. Moreover, the introduction of an unknown yet fearsome race like the Umbralfians would surely rattle the realm of Earth. Meraxa took a deep breath as he absorbed what he just heard, as he knew that the demanded tribute wouldn't be a trifle amount and would likely take a toll on his people. However, despite all this, he was willing to let his people have a chance on the surface world rather than the darkness they had lived their entire lives in. As the sun began its descent towards the horizon, Rowena, Meraxa, and Asher still sat in deep discussion. The hall echoed with the whispers of diplomacy and negotiations, the delicate dance of words flowing between them. Despite being a discrowned king, Meraxa held himself with regal authority, his every request woven with tactful diplomacy, each catering to the welfare of his people while making sure it wouldn't seem like he was stretching his hand too far. Rowena, on the other hand, was resolute with her terms. Her words and stipulations echoed the well-considered advice of her council, each aiming at fortifying their kingdom's position in the most beneficial way. Asher remained mostly a silent observer in this intricate exchange, since he didn't have the knowledge or experience to advise Rowena on things that could affect the entire kingdom. However, he keenly listened, absorbing the intricacies of negotiation and gaining insights into the robust system that kept the kingdom functioning. As the hours slipped away, the sun relinquished its reign to the creeping twilight, its fading light casting long, ominous shadows across the hall. Just as Rowena was about to finalize the meeting, a sudden pallor washed over Asher's face just as the shadows fell on his face. His previously stable aura wavered, a grimace etched onto his features. Rowena noticed the stark change in Asher's aura, the sudden instability in his life force piercing her senses. Her heart skipped a beat as her eyes widened in concern. "Asher," she called out gently, rising from her seat, making Meraxa, who also noticed this at the same time, look at Asher with furrowed brows. Rowena already sensed Asher's condition, which had been stable until now, had suddenly dipped into a chaotic storm of discomfort, seemingly hurting him from within. Without a second thought, Rowena declared, "Let's go home immediately. Ygritte will be able to help you." Her tone was firm, worry lacing her voice. She hadn't anticipated his condition relapsing, especially after Agrid had declared his miraculous recovery from the kraken siphoning his blood force. She knew usually people would die having their blood force siphoned or end up in a state worse than death, but since Asher seemed alright and he had immortal class bloodline, she didn't think it would affect him like others. With a weak smile gracing his lips, Asher pushed himself off his chair, doing his best to reassure Rowena. "Don't worry too much." He tried to sound confident, yet his voice wavered, hinting at the discomfort that was rapidly surging within him. "Let's go." A broken bar still, he agreed to go back, hastily walking past Rowena since he didn't want to die obviously and wasn't in the mood to figure out this by himself. Rowena followed him promptly, her steps mirroring his haste. Casting a brief, telling glance at Miraxa, she wordlessly communicated that they were done here. Miraxa, however, remained seated for a moment, lost in contemplation. A few seconds passed before he stood up, his decision made, and followed them. Stepping outside the hall, they were greeted by the cool evening breeze and the languid figure of Floralis, who had been resting nearby. Upon sensing its master's approach, it roused from its slumber and spread its wings in anticipation. The sky was now adorned with a blanket of shattered planets and twinkling stars, as the last of the sunlight faded. But before Asher could reach Floralis, a sharp pang of pain seized him, bringing him to his knees. It felt like his body was set ablaze from within, the searing heat relentlessly radiating to every corner of his body. A broken bar gritting his teeth, he attempted to resist the pain while confusion swirled within his mind, questioning the sudden turmoil in his body. "Ash," Rowena called out, her voice laced with anxiety as she hurried towards him. The sight of him crumpling to his knees had sent a jolt of fear coursing through her. Their distress caught the attention of the Naiadon tribe, worry gripping their hearts upon seeing their royal consort in such agony. The Umbralfians, however, bore a complicated mix of emotions. While some derived a sense of satisfaction from witnessing their enemies suffering, the others were plagued with uncertainty. They had already heard from their Midnight Maiden that the royal consort planned to build an alliance with them rather than treat them as prisoners, so they couldn't help but wonder what would become of their fate if this man met an untimely end. Rowena's hand darted out to support Asher, but as her fingers brushed his skin, her eyes shook with shock. His body was searing, akin to a furnace, as if an inferno raged within him. Just as she steeled herself, ready to carry him towards Floralis, an unusual commotion at the shoreline drew her attention. Whoosh! Waves crashed violently against one another, their thunderous roars resonating throughout the shore. From the churning sea, the big baby kraken surfaced, a relatively small figure perched atop it. Isola, with a puzzled expression on her face, was clearly caught off guard by the baby kraken's abrupt departure from their playful escapade. After Asher had left earlier this morning, she went into the seas, coaxing the baby kraken to come to her, which it did shortly after, and even though she was unable to find anything wrong with it, she played and cuddled with it for the next few hours. Since neither Asher nor anyone showed up, she wanted to spend time with the baby kraken as much as possible, not knowing when she might get to spend so much time with it again. However, just a few seconds ago, right as the sun disappeared from the skies, it began to swim upwards as if its life depended on it, leaving her quite confused despite calling out to it many times. And now, her puzzled gaze darted from the baby kraken to the scene unfolding on the shore. Spotting Asher, her eyes widened in surprise. Before she could even fully grasp the situation, the baby kraken propelled forward, towards Asher, causing her to clutch onto its slippery carapace to maintain her balance. Rowena's eyes hardened, tracking the baby kraken's rapid movement towards Asher. In her mind, the baby kraken was still the offspring of the beast that put Asher in this situation. Even though she knows a beast cannot harm its master, she couldn't afford to let it get close to Asher, not knowing if it harbors anger inside for its mother's death. Her protective instincts flared, her body tensing, ready to intercept the creature before it could reach Asher. In the midst of a distressing scenario, Asher weakly clasped Rowena's hand, shaking his head slightly. The gesture was simple, but it carried an unspoken plea. "Trust me, Her instincts were telling her to get him back to the castle, but in this moment, despite her confusion and worry, she chose to trust her heart and her faith in him, and so she took a step back, her gaze never leaving Asher. Isola, leaping off the baby kraken's back, watched in equal confusion as the big baby beast neared Asher. Though writhing in pain, a fascinating sensation swept over Asher, like an odd gravitational pull toward the creature. It was as if the distance between him and the creature directly correlated to his agony. As it moved closer, the agony continued to diminish, replaced by an inexplicable warmth that ebbed the pain away. A strange resonance seemed to vibrate between them, growing stronger with every passing second. With considerable effort, Asher lifted his head to look at the newborn creature. In the beady eyes of the big baby beast, Asher saw something familiar yet alien. His pain began to dull and, in its place, a connection blossomed, a link more profound than words could express. It was a peculiar feeling, foreign yet intimate, one that swept him into the realm beyond mortal comprehension. In that moment, surrounded by the silent murmurs of the crowd, under the dimming twilight, Asher felt his surroundings fading as all his senses focused onto the baby kraken rushing towards him. As the hushed crowd watched, Asher, against all odds, reached out his trembling hand towards the baby kraken. The big baby responded by extending one of its giant pincers, as if understanding his unspoken command. The anticipation grew thick in the air, a palpable pressure as man and beast made contact. Swoosh! But what happened next left everyone aghast. In a swift moment, as the physical connection was established, Asher and the baby kraken were enveloped in a burst of eerie emerald green flames. The brilliant eruption illuminated the setting twilight, casting long shadows on the shocked faces of the onlookers. Rowena's breath froze, her heart pounding against her chest. Isola, with a horrified expression, froze as she witnessed the spectacle unfold. However, both their instincts kicked in as they swiftly waved their hands at the same time, casting a wave of mana to extinguish the flames. The flames were easily overwhelmed by their power, dissipating into thin air in a second. A broken bar this can't be, but their relief of quelling the fire was short-lived, replaced by a rising sense of dread. The sandy spot where Asher and the baby kraken stood a moment ago was empty. Not even a trace of the man and the baby beast remained. The space was bare, save for the imprints they left behind. The crowd stared in disbelief at the empty spot. A heavy silence fell upon them, their hearts pounding in their chests. The words seemed to stick in their throats as they faced the stunning reality of the situation. Asher and the baby kraken were gone. All that remained were the scorch marks, the remnants of the dark green flames, and the chilling silence of loss. Asher felt his senses spinning before slowly settling down. The moment he touched the baby kraken, he suddenly felt like going to his damned dimension, as if he instinctively felt it was the only place that could make him feel better. And the next moment, he was already standing in the dimension of the damned. The dark green rocky terrain of this hellish world stretched out before him, desolate and eerie. The sky, a shifting mosaic of broken mirrors, reflected the fiery embers that the continuous eruptions of the surrounding volcanoes flung into the air. The atmosphere was stiflingly hot, pressing against his charred skeleton as if it were a physical weight, though it didn't bother him in the least. Yet, what truly shocked him was not the familiar sights of his dimension but his own flaming skeletal form. No way! A broken bar. He flexed his bony fingers, the blaze wrapping around them like a second skin. His Hellbringer form, a sight that shouldn't have been possible considering how he shouldn't be able to use mana for a while after falling sick. He also wasn't in pain anymore and felt like he was back to normal. A broken bar. Before Asher could fully process his state, a soft screech snapped him out of his thoughts. Spinning around, his eyes inwardly widened upon seeing the baby kraken. What the hell? A broken bar. The fact that the baby kraken somehow got itself into his personal dimension was not what shocked him the most. It was the uncanny sight before him that resembled his own. A creature that was once full of vibrant life was now a bare, skeletal shadow of its former self, yet there was something hauntingly beautiful about it. The baby kraken, a massive crustacean creature, now sported an eerie skeleton form ablaze with a spine-chilling emerald green flame. Its exoskeleton, previously sturdy and formidable, had been replaced by a spectral lattice of charred bones that glowed in the menacing dark green fire. Its once powerful, robust pincers now appeared like skeletal relics of what they used to be, their formidable power substituted by an ominous, ghostly beauty. Where flesh and shell once existed, only the intricate design of skeletal framework remained, each bone distinct and sharp, every detail accentuated by the dancing flames. The baby kraken's haunting eyes, once lively and full of curiosity, were now replaced by glowing orbs, burning brightly with the same dark green flame. They were set deep within the skeletal structure of its head, lending a haunting depth to its gaze. It almost seemed as if the creature was trapped in a constant state of awe and fear, as it slowly moved around its pincers, studying its own blazing form. Asher shook his head slowly, wondering how this was possible. It was common knowledge that the kraken was the guardian of the seas, and that meant the last elemental pathway it could possess was the fire element. He knew the mother kraken used his blood force to probably finish creating its offspring, but he never expected it to manifest in this way. Eths did his blood force alter her original bloodline? Was that even possible? Was this the reason why the baby kraken refused to go into the seas after sunset? Does it possess a dual nature of fire and water? Asher couldn't wrap his head around it since he had never heard of it, and it would be impossible since fire and water can't coexist together. He then narrowed his eyes as he observed that the uncanny spectacle of its skeletal form ignited a wave of distress in the baby kraken. Cree, cree. It began to emit panicked screeches that echoed throughout the forsaken landscape. The sound, surprisingly enough, stirred an unexpected instinct in Asher. Although he would be least bothered about the distressed cries of a beast, each of its screeches seemed to squeeze something within him. Before he knew it, his blazing skeletal form moved with an unnatural swiftness, defying the norms of his usual demeanor. A plume of dark green flames trailed behind him as he rushed towards the panicking creature, his skeletal features seemingly hardening into a mask of resolution. "Easy, big girl." Asher's voice reverberated around the desolate dimension, surprisingly soft and comforting as he caressed its pincers. It felt strange, even to him. However, his words seemed to have a calming effect on the big baby kraken. Cool broken bar. Despite its initial fear, the baby kraken soon grew calmer, its screeches turning into low whines, the creature's blazing eyes fixed on Asher's skeletal form, seemingly recognizing his aura. As it moved one of its skeletal pincers to touch Asher, a strange yet peaceful silence descended upon them. The baby kraken seemed to recognize that the same strange transformation that had befallen it had also occurred to Asher, providing it with a sense of security and reassurance. Asher, who had decided to not get drawn to anyone, found himself inexplicably drawn to the baby kraken. He watched as its form glowed and flickered in the ethereal glow of their shared green fire. It was a creature of a different kind, one devoid of the cunning and deceit he'd come to expect from both demons and humans alike. The feel of its skeletal pincer against his own was oddly comforting. He felt a strange sense of tenderness fill him, a sensation he had long since barred from his heart. Was this how a person gets affected once a beast imprints on them? How did this happen without him even realizing it? But he let it linger, this alien warmth, as he watched the beast, as innocent and clueless as a human child, trying to comprehend its transformed self. Asher found himself studying its eyes, finding them almost mirroring his own. A shared confusion, a shared transformation, a shared solitude. It was an uncanny reflection that caused him to wince inwardly, but also revealed to him the very innocence he had been searching for. This beast, unlike those that could talk, scheme, and betray, held no such faculties. Its heart, unlike his own, was unburdened by past grudges or betrayals. It was a heart that beat in rhythm with the simplicity of nature, pure and free from deceit, just like Isola said. This realization made Asher feel oddly at ease. The walls around his heart wavered, not dismantled, but certainly shaken. He understood that here, in this creature, lay an opportunity, an unprecedented chance to shape its emotions towards him. an assurance that even under Isola's influence, if he could form a strong bond with the creature from its formative stages, it would remain eternally loyal to him and would never betray him no matter what happens. He knew this was one of the reasons why people loved to have beasts as companions and raise them from the moment they were born. This realization didn't strike him until now, since he never thought too deeply about it, nor did he get the chance. The fact that it also could assume Hellbringer form only went on to show that it had a deep connection to him. He looked straight into the glistening orbs of the baby kraken, who appeared almost comical with its skeletal form outlined in dark green flames. "How about getting a name for yourself, Khaleesi?" His voice was soft, laced with an undertone of amusement, though he didn't expect a response from the creature. "Crew. To his astonishment, Khaleesi began snapping her pincers together, almost as if clapping in joy. A series of bright green flames spurted out from her, casting an otherworldly glow on Asher's charred skeleton. He didn't know if she even understood him, though he did hear experts saying how beast companions can sense their master's thoughts, but there was no solid proof to this theory. Still, Asher's eyes flickered with surprise and mirth as he realized Khaleesi's joyous reaction to her new name. "So, you like the name Khaleesi, do you?" he asked in a playful tone. Khaleesi responded with an even brighter burst of dark green flames, her eyes glimmering with a unique form of happiness. The silent proclamation of acceptance from her caused an unusual sensation of warmth to curl in Asher's chest. He also realized that despite her being a newborn creature of the sea, Khaleesi possessed a higher intelligence than a human infant. Suddenly, Asher remembered that he had got a pop-up in his head after coming here. He immediately checked out what it was. New passive ability awakened. Mark of the Damned. With just a touch, you can mark any being bonded to you and temporarily let them gain the power of Hellbringer and enter the dimension of the damned. Is this what really happened? Asher felt that it now made sense and remembered touching Khaleesi before they ended up here. New talent awakened. Cursed mark. Upon using the Mark of the Damned, you will instantly sacrifice 50% of your MP. When your MP gets exhausted or revert to your original form, any being with the mark will revert to their original form. 1:20. Oh well, a broken bar. Not surprised, are we? Asher mumbled with a sarcastic scoff as he took a look at his gradually dwindling MP, which was already below 50%. However, he felt that it was worth the price, since he could have an undying kraken beside him who won't fall until it saw his MP ran out. He then wondered if this ability was the reason his blood force got a jumpstart to let him use his powers again, even though he wasn't really sure about it. Feeling that he should get back before his disappearance causes a panic, he said, "Let's get back, shall we, Khaleesi?" The sandy beach that just moments ago bore witness to a horrifying spectacle was now a landscape painted with a mishmash of emotions. The people of Nyadon tribe were huddled together in their shared dread, their eyes wide, glistening with horror and disbelief as their gaze was fixated on the spot where their beloved consort had been consumed by the eerie green flames. Whispers of worry rippled through the crowd, their dread palpable, creating an air of anguish. Standing among the crowd were the Umbrolfians, their expressions a kaleidoscope of shock, confusion and a hint of fear. Their princess-cherished companion, the baby kraken, had met the same strange fate. Some muttered of devilish magic, their gaze darting towards the eerie dark skies, as if praying to the devils and begging for mercy. Since both of them disappeared and the royal consort seemed sick, they felt he couldn't have done anything on purpose. However, amidst this cacophony of emotions, there were two figures, seemingly islands of calm in the sea of disarray. The first was Rowena, her eyes narrowed and focused on the spot where Asher had vanished. Despite her initial shock, she remained composed, her faith in Asher's abilities unwavering. She knew the nature of the flames well, and its aura was unmistakably his, and the fact that his immortal bloodline granted him mysterious and powerful abilities that were beyond the comprehension of anyone in this realm made her feel that what happened now couldn't have hurt him. This consoled her somewhat, even as her heart pounded with the anxiety of uncertainty. The second was Isola, her connection with the baby kraken unbroken, thus relieving her of the worst of her fears while feeling that the sly consort was also probably alive. Her eyes were trained on the spot of the incident, her face a mask of confusion and quiet unease. Where did the two of them go? As Rowena instructed Neron to quell the rising panic amongst their people while Isola also tried to calm down hers, a sudden flash of ghostly green illuminated the beach, drawing every eye. Two figures materialized from thin air, standing at the exact spot where the enigmatic spectacle had taken place just minutes ago. The collective gasp echoed throughout the beach as the crowd beheld Asher, the royal consort, in his formidable Hellbringer form, his charred black skeleton aglow with the familiar emerald green flames. They all knew the name of his mystical, spine-chilling form that even defeated the Hellmaiden. A wave of relief washed over the crowd at the sight of their returned consort, their faces morphing from horror to awe. Thank the devils, the people of Nyadon tribe fell on their knees, bowing their heads in deference, their hearts filled with reverence and relief. However, what truly sent shockwaves through the crowd, leaving them completely awestruck, was the sight of the baby kraken. It too was ablaze, its body having undergone a similar transformation to Asher, now a glowing skeleton wreathed in emerald green flames. A palpable sense of relief washed over Rowena, the worry lines on her face gradually smoothing as she saw him in his blazing Hellbringer form, powerful and unhurt. Her heart, previously caught in a vice of anxiety, relaxed, its frantic pace slowing to a comfortable rhythm. Isola too sighed a deep breath of relief as her eyes fell upon the baby kraken. ''TM diaresis F.F.F.F. as but her relief was short-lived, replaced almost instantly by bafflement and concern just as Rowena, the creature before them was both familiar and foreign. The baby kraken was wreathed in the same emerald flames as Asher, and its body reduced to charred bones without any flesh. Isola's voice trembled with concern as she rushed towards it. "Asher, what have you done to her?" She stepped forward, her eyes darting between the baby kraken and Asher, her mind racing with questions. Asher merely scoffed, a nonchalant smirk playing on his skeletal face. "Take a good look, princess. Does Khaleesi look distressed to you?" Khaleesi? The name Khaleesi slipped off Asher's tongue naturally, surprising Isola. Her eyes widened as she repeated the name under her breath. She never expected him to take the initiative to name it. Because of that, she had been thinking all day about a nice name to give it and was looking forward to it. Her confusion was quickly replaced with astonishment as she observed the baby kraken, or rather, Khaleesi, snap her pincers together in delight at the sound of her new name. Isola's heart fluttered at the sight, a tender smile forming on her lips. She also had to begrudgingly admit that Khaleesi suited the baby kraken, and so she didn't say anything about it, especially if it was happy with the name. But what concerned her more was Khaleesi's blazing skeletal form that resembled Asher's. Ignoring the eerie flames flickering around Khaleesi, her hand gently brushed Khaleesi's pincer. Instead of burning her, the flames felt warm, even comforting. She felt a wave of reassurance wash over her, even as her mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. Meanwhile, Rowena could see that the connection between the baby kraken and Asher seemed to have been fully established. She didn't understand what exactly happened, but seeing the baby kraken transform like this, she could tell that Asher's blood force had definitely influenced its bloodline. Something like that was quite rare and dangerous, and she never expected it would manifest this way. However, she was glad it did, since, at least this way, the baby kraken would have a strong connection to Asher. Still, she couldn't help but step closer to Asher, her hand reaching out to hold his, unconcerned by his skeletal form. Her gaze softened further as she asked, "Asher, are you all right, and where did you and Khaleesi disappear to?" Asher's gaze met Rowena's, a spark of something unspoken passing between them. The flames around his figure died out as the skeletal form of his body began to regenerate, morphing back into his dark elf form, flesh rapidly growing back over his bones while Rowena's astonished gaze never left him. She still had yet to get used to this otherworldly devilish ability of his. Feeling the warmth return to his hand in Rowena's grasp, Asher spoke, his voice soft but firm. "I have never felt better. You can relax now." But there was an air of hesitation around him as he grappled with what to share next. Despite being her husband, he was cautious as ever, a hard lesson learned from past betrayals and losses. His secrets, especially his personal dimension, were his to keep, and he can't let someone else use them against him. "I'm not exactly sure of what transpired," he began, his gaze flickering to Khaleesi, who also reverted back to its original form. "Much to Isola's relief, I was unconscious for a while, and when I woke up, I was somewhere else, a place full of flames with Khaleesi by my side, and before I knew it, we were back here. I'm not sure how that happened and why." Asher mixed in some truth so that it wouldn't sound like complete nonsense. Rowena listened in silent astonishment, her eyes reflecting the profound mystery that was Asher. If she heard this from anyone else, she would struggle to believe it. But since it was him and knowing how his immortal bloodline was something beyond her comprehension, she knew there was no point in being more curious about it. Isola too felt a similar whirlwind of emotions, his words, his transformation, and his inexplicable influence on Khaleesi that even caused her to transform. They only added to his enigma. The shocking abilities he displayed in the belly of the Kraken made her wonder if he was really immortal at that time. She found herself mulling over his identity, his origins. How was he the only one of his race to exist here? It almost felt like he belonged to a different realm altogether. Such a notion was absurd to her, and to anyone in Zoltha for that matter. They knew their world to be the only one with life, with the rest being nothing more than chaotic wastelands. Yet, she was glad to see that Khaleesi had reverted back to her normal cute form, since she wasn't sure if those flames would cause it to become uncomfortable later. "Let me introduce you to Khaleesi," Asher said as he held Rowena's hand and brought her forward. Rowena didn't expect this gesture from Asher suddenly, but she didn't mind and was also eager to get familiar with his companion, just like how Asher was familiar with Flowerless. But Isola stood there, her brow furrowing as she watched Asher trying to introduce someone else to her precious companion. She didn't voice out her concern, letting Khaleesi decide for herself, yet it weighed slightly in her chest. "Cree." As Rowena stepped closer, Khaleesi waved her pincers wildly, her distress clear for all to see. Asher was quick to catch the undercurrent of fear in her movements, realizing it was the lingering fear from Rowena's earlier intimidation when they saw each other for the first time. His lips parted, his voice washing over Khaleesi like a warm wave. "Khaleesi, it's all right," he cooed, his voice gentle yet firm, commanding the baby Kraken's attention. His dark yellow eyes flickered to Rowena, silently instructing her to move closer at a slow pace. His hand reached out, caressing the hard shell of Khaleesi's pincer, whispering to her in a comforting tone, "Easy, girl, this woman beside me is someone I care about deeply, so I will be happy if you can get along with her as well." Isola blinked, taken aback by the unexpected tenderness in Asher's voice. The rogue she had always seen him to be was overshadowed by this unexpected, gentler side. He surely was a consort with more than one face, but since he seemed to be nice to Khaleesi, she was relieved. Her earlier worries of him treating Khaleesi harshly and with indifference lessened. Timidly, Khaleesi turned her gaze onto Rowena. Rowena attracted her aura, her countenance soft and warm to make herself appear harmless to it. After what felt like an eternity, Khaleesi slowly reached out a pincer towards Rowena, prompting a subtle smile from her. With slow grace, Rowena extended her hand, her fingers gently brushing against its huge pincer, making Rowena subtly smile. The crowd around them let out a collective sigh of relief and fascination, their hearts touched by the sight before them. The Nyadon people beamed, their queen and their royal consort's companion getting along was an endearing sight. The Umbralfians, however, weren't feeling too happy for obvious reasons. They still were possessive of their baby guardian and were worried that the Bloodburn Kingdom would snatch it away from them as well. However, standing at a distance was Maraxa and his wife, Narisara, observing everything in silence and with deep contemplation. Narisara wrinkled her nose upon seeing the Bloodburn Queen getting friendly with their baby guardian and shifted her gaze towards Miraxa. Do you still think we shouldn't prepare ourselves for the worst? Miraxa took a deep breath as his gaze focused on Asher and said with a veiled glint in his eyes, we can never really know a broken bar. The soft glow of the blood moon graced the sandy shores of Nyadon, casting long shadows that danced around the lively figure of Khaleesi. The baby kraken was immersed in her play, sending out dark green flames from her pincers and watching in fascination as they licked at the chilly air while Asher and Isola were watching. Asher had told Rowena that she can take care of the affairs in the north while he would stay here for a while to play with Khaleesi. He felt playing with Khaleesi should deepen their connection and not let Isola gain the upper hand. It also did feel amusing to watch her do silly things on her own. He wondered if he would feel the same if he was to raise his own kid. For a certain reason, Rowena's face flashed in his mind since he knew one of his duties involved giving her air. He still didn't know what to think about it since he felt he was far from ready to become a father and didn't want to be one either, but he was not worried since he still had time to think things through. Isola was sat beside Asher, her eyes fixed on Khaleesi, repeatedly blinking as if trying to dispel a mirage. She was still processing the fact that Khaleesi had a dual-nature mana circuit. It was verified by her parents and other experts, as they discovered that Khaleesi harbored an extraordinary biological switch within her mana circuit, allowing her to alternate between water and fire elemental pathways every 12 hours. It was as if the laws of nature had been rewritten specifically for this creature. She couldn't help but steal a glance at Asher as she thought about this. She felt it made sense why Khaleesi didn't want to enter the sea after sunset. She also felt that yesterday Khaleesi must have panicked after not understanding the sudden changes that took place in her body, but now that Khaleesi had gotten used to her unique body, Isola felt relieved. Asher, meanwhile, seemed unaffected by this revelation. He was more interested in how powerful Khaleesi would become when she grows up. He had never heard of a newborn beast who was already a soul reaper out of the box. Even newborn dragons would be strong as a soul warrior at most, and the fact that a kraken could live at least a staggering 1,000 years made him wonder about how powerful Khaleesi's bloodline was. But what made him feel most satisfied was that Khaleesi could enter his damned dimension if he wanted to. This meant that he could summon her whenever he wanted, and since she was not a damned soul, she would be able to fight at full strength beside him. However, he knew he could only summon her in situations where there won't be any witnesses left behind since he couldn't let anyone else know for now that he could summon an undying kraken to fight alongside him. However, Isola felt that maybe she might have misjudged Asher a bit and he didn't seem as thoughtless as she thought, but she felt maybe a rogue like him could be a different person towards their beast companion. Asher's rich baritone suddenly disrupted her thoughts. We should get going, princess, he declared, standing up. His voice was curt, hinting no room for argument. Isola's sapphire blue eyes, which held a light hint of melancholy, widened. The serene moments watching Khaleesi play had made her lose track of time. She turned towards Asher, a low sigh escaping her lips. Can't we stay a bit longer? She pleaded. eth''ftm currency eth''ftms eth''ftm superscript aftm diaresis ftm.eth currency eth degrees eth register Asher scoffed at her request. Have you forgotten? From tomorrow, you'll be off completing quests, and you'd best remember to hand over your share of earnings, he reminded her, his cold dark yellow eyes piercing into her. His comment was sharp and laced, reminding Isola of the terms of the agreement struck between Queen Rowena and her father. Isola narrowed her eyes at him, her lips pressed in a thin line. He was far more self-serving than she'd originally thought, cleverly exploiting the situation to his benefit. As a soul devourer she would earn multiple times higher than what Asher could earn at his strength, and so even a small percent of her life crystals would be a lot for Asher. However, she had no idea that Asher's thirst for life crystals wouldn't even be satisfied even if there were 10 of her offering him life crystals. But despite her irritation, she didn't argue. Rising to her feet, she met Asher's gaze, Fine beauty broken bar. I've never had to fight humans before. A broken bar. It feels a broken bar strange, she confessed, her voice a whisper against the ocean's soft lullaby. His dark laughter echoed in response to her admission. You'll feel plenty motivated once they start killing your people for sport and rewards, parading your people's heads as trophies and bragging about it, he said, his tone cold and void of any comfort. Isola swallowed hard, her gaze falling to the sandy beach below. The brutal reality painted by Asher made her heart clench, but she knew he was right. The face of their enemy had changed, but the threat remained. The shadow of the cursed wraiths was replaced by humans. A determined fire sparked in her eyes, replacing the uncertainty that resided there a moment ago. She realized how the fighting and killing would still continue, but now they had a real chance of fighting back and surviving, and so she was determined to do whatever was necessary to not let our people suffer again. Upon noticing that the two were about to leave, Khaleesi let out a low, mournful sound, a watery trill that echoed across the vast expanse of the shore. A broken bar. She scuttled over as swiftly as her bulky form would allow, causing a small, playful wave of sand to overflow the ground, raising each claw towards Asher and Isola in a silent plea. She blinked her beady eyes with an almost comical desperation, begging them to not go. Don't be sad, Khaleesi, Isola said as she caressed its pincer, feeling bad upon seeing it trying to make them stay. She wished she could bring Khaleesi with them, though not only was she too big, but it also wouldn't be right to let her be away from her home, the seas. We will be back to see you tomorrow. Asher will promise you, won't you, Asher? Isola asked as she looked at him, testing to see if he was really serious about Khaleesi. Asher knew what Isola was trying to do, though it didn't really matter since he had every intention of looking after Khaleesi, so he nodded as he patted her pincer and said with a warm smile, of course. We will play with you tomorrow, so sleep tight like a nice girl, and we will be back before you know it. Asher felt that he should probably ask Rowena for some tips on how to raise a beast as a companion. This was all new and unfamiliar to him. Khaleesi glanced at the two before reluctantly lowering her pincers as if understanding that they had to go for now. As Asher and Isola soon gradually disappeared from sight, Meraxa stood there, silently watching the direction they'd taken. Why didn't you try to negotiate with Rowena to let our daughter stay here instead of being imprisoned among our enemies? Narissara questioned suddenly as she stood beside him, her voice wavering subtly. You know how Isola is. Even if she's suffering, she won't let us know. We taught her to be strong enough to fight through any storm, but sometimes, that's not always a good thing. Meraxa sighed, turning to face his wife. And why can't you convey all these worries to our daughter personally, Narissa? He asked, his tone gentle. Narissara averted her stony gaze, her voice lowering to a whisper. It wasn't necessary. Meraxa reached out, his hands resting on Narissara's shoulders. His gaze was soft, filled with understanding. Narissa, you are not alone in whatever you are feeling right now. Trust me. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. She kept her gaze averted, though the usually icy shimmer in her eyes started to glisten. Isola will be all right in the castle, Meraxa reassured, his voice steady. If they wanted to cause her harm, they wouldn't have let her come to see us. I can also tell if our daughter is hiding something, and she isn't. His gaze then moved in the direction Asher and Isola had left. Perhaps, all of this is happening for a reason. Narissara furrowed her brows, looking up at Meraxa. What do you mean by that? She asked. Do you know anyone in this realm with the fabled immortal bloodline? Only the Devourer was said to obtain an immortal class bloodline before dying in the 7th trial. Meraxa responded, his tone serious. Asher might be a young man with his own agendas, but his existence here feels to be for a reason, and something tells me that we have yet to understand the prophecy of the ancients. Asher left the Demonstone Castle right after making sure Isola was back inside. She skeptically asked him where he was going to at this late hour, to which he said she wouldn't want to know that, making her not ask about it again. A few minutes later, the atmosphere of the city outside the grandiose edifice of the Honeyed Pearl was bustling with life. especially with men of different races crowded together for the same goal. Amongst this crowd was Asher as he maneuvered through the throngs of people, a spectre amidst the crowd, shrouded in the protection of the spectre's ring gifted to him by Nader. His true identity was masked beneath the guise of a commoner and nobody suspected anything. However, as usual, cloaked in subtlety, his silent protector, Eradicator, followed him, but thanks to his instructions, she kept a careful distance, watching Asher's every move. The height of this tall, cloaked figure could easily catch attention, but given the distance, they passed off as unrelated individuals, adeptly avoiding drawing undue attention. But seeing the cute cat with black fur, piercing green eyes, and two fluffy tails resting on their arms and licking their hands, the passerbys no longer felt that intimidated about this cloaked figure. Asher's arrival at the back door of the Honeyed Pearl went unnoticed by the passers-by. The very wood of the door seemed to absorb him as he slipped through, entering the shadowy back chambers of the building. On the other side, he was met with a pair of narrowed, golden eyes that glowed in the dim light. It was Shoichi, Kira's protector, an imposing figure despite his restrained position. The lines of his face pulled into a familiar expression of displeasure at Asher's arrival. His gaze was intense, akin to a predator eyeing its prey, yet he was acutely aware of his place and reluctantly stepped aside to let Asher pass. The animosity was palpable, an invisible tension that sparked in the air like static electricity, yet Asher paid it no mind, making his way into Kira's chambers with a nonchalant air, while Shoichi's icy gaze seemed to bore into his back, an unspoken warning lingering in the room. Shoichi couldn't help but feel something stifling in his chest, and this feeling only kept getting worse the more Asher came here. He still couldn't understand why someone so powerful and elegant like his madam would keep someone crafty as him close. Asher's journey through the corridor felt like a descent into a different world, and as he pushed open the ornate, heavy door to Kira's chamber, he was greeted by a sight as intoxicating as it was alluring. The chamber was bathed in a soft, amber light that bounced off the gold and ruby-hued fabrics adorning the room. Scents of exotic flowers and spicy incense hung heavy in the air, creating an intoxicating atmosphere that was both inviting and ominous as always. At the heart of the room, upon a plush chaise draped with silken fabrics, reclined the mistress of this seductive realm. Kira's form was a vision to behold. Her golden hair spilled over her shoulders like a waterfall of sun-warmed silk. The soft glow of the room caught the edges of her emerald eyes, setting them ablaze with a spark of intrigue and mystery. Her almond-shaped eyes were fixed on him, her gaze captivating and unreadable. Her silk gown, the color of the deepest night sky, hugged her curves perfectly, accentuating the sensuous arc of her waist, the fullness of her hips, and the tantalizing dip of her bosom. A deep neckline allowed a teasing view of her cleavage and hinted at the promise of more hidden beneath the fabric. The gown was offset by her fox-like features, her pointy ears and bushy, golden tails flicking casually in the dim light. Asher stepped into the chamber with a steady gaze, though inwardly, he had to admit seeing this woman was enough to make one forget about everything else in the world except her, especially with this ambience. Fortunately, someone with honed willpower didn't have to worry about it. Kira gracefully rose from her repose, her lithe form unfolding like a blossoming flower. She approached him, her movements fluid and enchanting, every step sending ripples through the room's heavy, perfume-laden air. Ora, if it isn't the Kraken Conqueror himself. I feel so honored that you graced me with your presence at such a late hour. Why don't you make yourself comfortable? She cooed, her voice like honey, dripping with flattery and thinly veiled taunt while sitting down on a chair. Asher was now quite used to her way with words that could make anyone feel flattered but at the same time scratched at their pride. However, he wasn't bothered at all since she had been quite helpful to him for the past year and sat down on a chair as well. Her almond-shaped eyes sparkled with amusement, a teasing smile playing on her lips. Things certainly seem to be going well for you, Your Highness. I wonder why, she continued, her tone holding a tinge of admiration mixed with curiosity. The smirk that played on Asher's lips deepened as he regarded Kira. His cool gaze swept over her, as he replied, obviously, Your special information network has indeed been a great help in quickly rooting out the traitors." His words were wrapped in an undertone of casual taunt, yet laced with a sense of appreciation. Kira let out a sigh, feigning hurt as she pressed a hand dramatically against her chest. "Oh, darling, it wounds me that you look down on me. Just because I run a brothel, it doesn't mean I'm not a woman of substance." Her head tilted to the side, her eyebrows arching up in curiosity as she added, "I can understand if you don't want to reveal your mysterious abilities that helped you survive in the belly of the Kraken. But one thing kept me up yesterday night though," she began, her voice a whisper. "How did you discover its weakness or even know it had a fatal one?" Inwardly, Kira was still grappling with the astonishing notion that someone as weak as Asher had not only managed to infiltrate the Kraken but also had found a way to weaken it. He even fell sick from fighting it and was already back on his feet. However, she was convinced there was a secret weakness he had exploited. Otherwise, someone like him wouldn't have taken the risk of entering unless he was as strong as Rowena, which he obviously wasn't. But she was even more curious about who gave him such information. A bemused smirk tugged at the corners of Asher's mouth. "A little birdie told me," he stated, his tone light, yet enigmatic. His smirk widened as he added, "And that little birdie? Well, wouldn't want this secret to not be one anymore." Kira's brows lifted higher, an exaggerated look of surprise crossing her face. "Don't tell me it's a woman," she said, pressing a hand against her chest. The corners of her mouth tugged into a faux shocked expression. "I already feel jealous that some woman is trying to win over my dearest patron." Asher blinked his eyes, wondering if this woman ever gets tired of pretending to be a loving damsel, or was it that she spent too much time in this business, and it sort of got ingrained into her? Nevertheless, he could see why men loved to hear such words coming from a woman. It makes them feel special and wanted. Kira leaned back in her chair, her expression softening into a sigh of regret. "What a pity," she murmured, her emerald eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and a teasing challenge. She then leaned forward, her gaze hardening as she peered into Asher's eyes. "I've been wondering about something. My little birdies tell me that the late Lord Nolan was quite comfortable here before the war broke out. He even brokered a deal with a certain individual from the massacred village to trigger the rebellion, as I told you before, so I can't help but think." She trailed off, her voice lowering to a thoughtful hum. "Isn't it rather foolish, even counterintuitive, for Nolan to massacre the same village after going through all that trouble?" Asher narrowed his eyes at Kira, his expression growing increasingly more guarded. He could see the direction of her probing, and it wasn't a place he was keen on venturing. But Kira wasn't done. Rising from her chair, she walked behind Asher's seat with grace, her gown rustling softly against the carpeted floor. "Also, it was quite a shock to hear about poor young Lord Edmund's injury in the war, especially since, well," she paused, turning to face him with an arch look, "Edmund has never been one to take part in wars, has he? The timing of his injury and the massacre seems rather convenient, don't you think?" Coming to a halt in front of Asher, Kira tilted her head to the side, her emerald eyes glinting with a sharp intelligence. "Why are you protecting Edmund, Your Highness?" she asked, her voice low and filled with curiosity. "To such a far extent of even pinning the massacre on Lord Nolan?" Asher's expression transitioned into a chilling blend of coldness and tranquility. "If I were you," he began, his tone edging on dangerous, "I would tread very carefully. There are questions which, when asked, could put one in peril." He looked at Kira, his gaze freezing over, revealing nothing. Inside, he realized that she was dangerously sharp and perceptive, but he had expected nothing less from a woman who ran a vast network of secrets. Yet, Asher didn't feel like revealing his plans to her. He wasn't inclined to trust such information on someone who prided themselves in the manipulation of information. Observing his guarded expression, Kira's features softened into a gentle smile. "Don't take it so seriously, love," she implored, a glint of mischief flaring in her eyes. "We may have met under less amiable circumstances, but I've come to know you better since then. The lengths you go to protect this kingdom, even if that meant taking questionable paths." She trailed off, her smile widening. I'd like to think that we've become something akin to friends. Or am I being presumptuous? Asher's eyebrows furrowed slightly. He understood the implications of her words in between her flowery flattery. She knew enough to cause him trouble, particularly in regard to the dubious circumstances surrounding Lord Nellan's execution. However, he had anticipated this. He needed Kira's help to gain the upper hand, and he knew she most probably wouldn't betray him. She had too much to lose. The term friends was a veiled reference to their mutual benefit and the destruction they could cause to each other if one of them was stupid enough to do that. However, he was at a loss about her intentions behind her spiel. She was merely stating the obvious, but why? A gleeful smile spread across Kira's face. I've never been this impressed with someone who takes risks and shows such potential, she admitted, annoyed by her roundabout talk. Asher cut her off. Enough playing around, Kira. What do you really want? Kira's grin turned coy and alluring, straight to the point. You really know my preference. So broken bar, I've been helping you out of self-preservation. But, I presume you came here to sever our connection, to cut ties now that you think you don't need me that anymore, she continued, her eyes locked onto Asher. His reaction told her she had hit the nail on the head. He didn't expect her to catch on to that too. He had decided to cut her off since he didn't want her to learn too much about his activities while interacting with her, even if it would be a huge loss. He planned to build his own information network, though he knew it would take a lot of time and effort. Kira wasn't finished as she parted her shiny, full lips. I don't want that to happen, she confessed, her voice soft yet firm now. I'm prepared to help you wholeheartedly. The air in the room grew tenser as Asher contemplated Kira's sudden change of stance. He had known her to be disgruntled about being pulled into this the first night they met, yet now she proposed wholehearted support. His dark, deep yellow eyes flickered with a touch of doubt. She was a sly fox. Asher couldn't shake off the feeling that she was up to something. Leaning back in his chair, he crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing skeptically at her. You are not the kind of woman to be selfless or altruistic, he began, his tone cautious. So, why the sudden change? What are you really after? Darling. Kira's eyes sparkled as Asher's skepticism met her ears. With a soft sigh, she began to sway slowly toward him, a move that would have made any other man's heart quicken. My darling, she purred, fluttering her eyelashes in a teasing manner, you're far too paranoid. Her voice, soft and cajoling, filled the room as she walked around his chair to stand behind him. Do you know what it's like, to have your wings clipped? Her voice was tinged with a faint sadness. House Thorn, they've limited me, kept me under their thumb. They don't let me expand my business, my influence. It's as though they're afraid of what I might become if I step out of their shadow. Asher scoffed, his eyes narrowing further. And why wouldn't they? You bring in wealth and fame to them. They wouldn't want to lose such a valuable asset. Kira nodded, a sigh escaping her lips. I understand that, but, can you really blame a bird for wanting to fly? However, Asher wasn't entirely convinced. He gave a slow shake of his head, skepticism etching his features. Why would I trust anything a woman like you says? At that, Kira pouted, her slender fingers tracing their way to Asher's broad shoulders, kneading gently into the muscles. Why would I ever hurt you, love? Especially considering the fact that I have so much more to lose. You remember, don't you? Her voice was laced with a heavy dose of seductive allure. Your scary protector even threatened to send me to the pits of Tartarus if I ever harm you again. Asher blinked his eyes as he never knew about this. How did Eradicator know Kira tried to kill him? Asher couldn't help but feel that Eradicator was even better at her job than he expected. She moved closer to him, her slender hands still massaging his tense shoulders. Given that, she continued, I'd have to be a complete fool to betray your confidence, wouldn't I? Her voice held a blend of mischief and conviction, leaving Asher to ponder over her words, but he couldn't help but feel a bit distracted as Kira's delicate fingers expertly worked their way across his shoulders, a ripple of unexpected pleasure surging through him. Her touch was at once comforting and disconcerting, the sensation curling down his spine and pulling a reluctant sigh from his lips. The sensation was amplified by the subtle fragrance of her perfume, a captivating blend of jasmine and something intoxicatingly exotic, filling his senses. The fact that she could do all this with just her bare hands was enough to let one realize how dangerous she was. However, Asher was no stranger to the art of persuasion, nor was he a man easily swayed by the allure of a seductive woman. Remaining the master of his mind, he kept enjoying her massage and said, "Very well, I will think about it, but first, you have to prove what you said. I would need you to do something just like what I asked last year. FTM pound death apostrophe F apostrophe F apostrophe FTM inverted exclamation mark F apostrophe F apostrophe FTM dot F apostrophe FTM sense." Even without her persuading him, Asher felt that maybe it was better to stick to her. Even if he comes up with his own information network, it would never be as good and effective as hers, and for someone with his circumstances, he can't risk getting behind. Oh, the low, sultry hum of Kira's voice faded as she ceased her ministrations, her hands sliding away from his shoulders as though her touch was a whisper of silk. She stood and glided across the plush carpet, moving with the grace of a practiced dancer to take her place across from him. The gentle rustle of her gown filled the silence between them as she perched herself elegantly on the opulent chair. A satisfied smile curled on her lips as she gazed at Asher, her eyes sparkling with intrigue, as she asked, her voice a melodious purr, "And who might be the unfortunate soul to earn your wrath this time? Will it be the same method as before?" Asher dismissed her questions with a wave of his hand, his tone casual, yet firm. "Don't concern yourself with who's on the receiving end," he said. "I'm more interested in the execution. Unlike last time, I will make the effects real. However, they should appear as an illusion afterward." Kira's emerald eyes blinked, the surprise in them replaced by a spark of understanding. "A real illusion, you say?" She mulled over his words, her gaze distant yet thoughtful. "I can certainly arrange that even if it's quite risky." Asher's lips curved into a smile as his eyes glinted with a cold light. He then asked, "About the special ingredients you asked for last time?" Kira waved off his concerns with an air of confidence. "Don't burden yourself with such details, darling," she said, leaning back in her chair, her posture relaxed and comfortable. "Unlike last time, I can't let you do all the heavy lifting. I can procure necessary elements on my own." The soft rustle of silk against silk filled the room as Asher rose from his chair, his posture a pillar of certainty and unyielding resolve. "Then I'll be back soon for the results," he said, his voice resonating with a mixture of authority and anticipation. A swift, surprised blink flashed across Kira's face as she noticed an unexpected detail. Like a sheathed long sword, a thick, long bulge became visible at Asher's crotch. Her eyes widened momentarily, wondering what kind of man-beast he was. Her thoughts trailed off as a teasing smile curled her lips. "My darling," she said, her voice playful and coy, "it seems you should tend to your little friend's eagerness before you depart this building." The sound of Asher's chuckle broke the tension in the room, his gaze momentarily dropping to his lower half before returning to meet Kira's. "I wonder who might be responsible for my little friend's condition," he retorted, an amused glint in his eyes. Even though his mind had remained focused during the massage, his body, evidently, had been more receptive to Kira's touch, and her tempting presence was hardly a calming influence. Kira's legs raised and coiled onto the chair, her posture becoming even more seductive as she sighed softly. "I am flattered, but an older woman like myself could hardly satisfy the needs of a young, virile man like you," she lamented, her words dripping with feigned regret. "But fear not, Azura and Kira are always eager to cater to your condition, waiting for you right outside." "That's a shame, though I am sure Azura and Kira can help me out in this case," Asher said with a smirk, his eyes flicking over Kira's reclining form one last time. He carried a flicker of doubt inside about what kind of a succubus she was. The ones he knew would have jumped at the opportunity, but he brushed it aside, his footsteps echoing against the lavish floors as he left her chamber. Outside, in her quiet moments of vigilance, Eradicator often found herself in deep thought, her attention focused on the grandiose building, especially on the top floor. She made a mistake once and was determined to not make it again. Twilight, sensing how cold and sharp her aura had been for a while, climbed onto her shoulder and gently head-butted her, as if trying to persuade her to relax. Eradicator's gaze softened a bit as she nestled Twilight in her arms, and idly scratched under the cat's chin, drawing forth a low rumbling purr that echoed in the quiet night. However, the moment Asher came out, her aura immediately reverted back to its steely, sharp state. After Asher had left Honeyed Pearls, he met up with Darren Alistair in an elite restaurant, in a room with privacy. Darren was eagerly waiting for him, and the moment he saw him, Darren was about to kneel before Asher when Asher stopped him. "There is no need for all this, I only did what I would do for my vassal," Asher said as he also took a glance at the expensive gifts placed on the table. Darren wryly smiled as he straightened his back and said with an overwhelmed look, "Your Highness, I know you took huge risks to help me out by protecting my house. I came to know what my father did to instigate the rebellion when he told me my house would no longer treat me as an outcast. He said it was all thanks to your grace, and that is why he also wanted to give you these gifts to show his gratitude," Darren said as he gestured toward the table adorned with gifts. Asher subtly smiled as he patted Darren's shoulder and said, "Taking risks is nothing new to me, Darren. You have proved yourself during the war, equipping our Dragon Legion with the finest enchanted weapons. I overlooked your father's treacherous actions because I know you will continue to do better and make your house proud. And, of course, Rebecca will no longer have a hold over your house unless your father wants to court death." Darren nodded with a complicated smile as he deeply bowed and apologized fervently. "I again deeply apologize for my father's treachery. Not only me but my father is also forever indebted to you. Even if my house is not your vassal, my father is ready to do anything for you under the table." Darren knew how close his house was to courting destruction because of his father's actions. If not for the royal consort intervening for his sake, his future would have been finished. Nobody would respect the son of a traitor, and he would be lucky if he didn't get assassinated by some angry, dangerous people. Asher inwardly chuckled and felt that it was a good thing he scared Lord Alcester well enough to bend his back for him. The only reason he saved him was because his house was one of the largest manufacturers of enchanted armor and weapons. Since he was planning to build an army of his own, he would need huge support from such a house. Asher gestured to Darren to rise and said as he rubbed his fingers, "I appreciate his sincerity, but I wonder whether he can satisfy a request of mine?" Darren's eyes immediately lit up as he eagerly asked, "Of course, anything for you." Darren was brimming with the urge to do even more for the royal consort since he didn't want to make the royal consort feel that he was not that useful. "How about an armor set for Khaleesi? Do you guys have experience in making such a huge armor?" Asher asked with a doubtful look. Darren's expression lit up as he said, "That is not really hard. Even if we don't usually make armor that big, the size doesn't really matter. We would be glad to deliver the finest armor for Khaleesi as soon as possible. A majestic creature like that can only deserve the best. Take your own time, and I guess that will be all for now. Let's eat something, shall we? I am famished," Asher said with a smile as the two sat down for a feast. For 30 days, the Bloodburn Kingdom teetered on the sharp edge of suspense, its very atmosphere heavy with palpable tension. The Queen, in her formidable righteousness, was ripping away the curtain of deceit that had shrouded the kingdom. Her relentless pursuit of justice echoed through the kingdom, casting long, ominous shadows on the blood-stained cobblestones of the capital. Traitors met their fiery end. The grim spectacle of the royal pyres served as a grisly testament to the price of treachery. These were men who had once shared feast and fight, now consigned to the flames in a brutal purge that spared none of the guilty. Even some of the elite officials of House Drake, once paragons of nobility, found themselves ensnared in this inquisition. Yet, the majority of those exposed bore the mark of those under House Thorn. Lord Thorin however took responsibility and stood by the Queen, his unwavering loyalty bared for all to see as he plucked out the traitors among his vassals, sacrificing them on the altar of justice. Some of these vassals were quite valuable to Lord Thorin and yet he remained steadfast, This made the people feel sympathetic and feel great respect for the commitment and loyalty of him and his house towards them despite suffering so many losses. They very well knew how much face House Thorn lost since it was their duty to prevent such a war from happening, and now that the Kraken was no longer theirs but left behind as a mere symbol, it was no different than rubbing salt on their wounds. Even if the royal consort was still part of the kingdom, it doesn't negate the political relationship and the power dynamic between the great houses. Amidst this cleansing firestorm, an eerie sense of relief spread among the common folk. Their queen had promised to rid their land of the treacherous rot, and she was keeping her word. The flames of the pyres served as brutal, purifying beacons of hope, restoring their faith in the crown, no matter how harsh the methods. At least this way, anyone would think twice before harming this kingdom and the loyal people within it. Only House Valentine remained untouched by this storm of purges, its men and women holding their heads high, their reputations unblemished. This fact sparked much speculation among the people. Some murmured that House Valentine's duties of border protection had shielded them from the tendrils of treason. They also didn't participate in the war since they were busy making sure nobody outside the kingdom would try to catch them off guard. Others, however, pointed to Lord Vernon Valentine and his lady, Nada, attributing their clean slate to their stringent governance. The couple's scrupulous oversight over their vassals earned them a considerable degree of respect amidst the kingdom's crisis. As master diplomats they also probably knew how to handle people as well. The Bloodburn Kingdom was in a state of upheaval, yet it was a transformation necessary for its redemption. As the ashes of treachery scattered in the wind, so too did the seeds of newfound trust and resilience begin to take root now that the frightening Umberalfians had been subdued. As the morning light spilled over the hills, painting the Bloodburn Kingdom with hues of crimson and gold, Asher returned from a taxing quest, an FSV-lisp.cfss with a sigh of relief. He decided to seek out Rowena, now that her relentless hunt for treachery had drawn to a close. The intense investigation had caused a temporary halt in their usual painting classes that Rowena was deeply fond of. This only went on to show how busy she had been these past few weeks, and so he had understood the gravity of the situation and refrained from disturbing her during the critical period. Indeed, the purging of the traitors had been in his best interests too, ensuring that no dark threats lingered in the shadows, waiting to sabotage his plans, for Asher knew all too well that those who lurk in the depths are far more dangerous than the ones who brandish their intentions openly. Loyal men, however predictable and mundane, were far more comfortable to handle, their actions clear as daylight. With these thoughts swirling in his mind, Asher stepped into Rowena's private study. The high, arched windows spanned the walls, allowing a cascade of morning light to drench the room, illuminating the polished mahogany surfaces, the towering bookshelves, and the exquisite paintings that adorned the walls. However, as always, what caught his eyes was the stunning Gothic beauty at the largest windows, her silhouette defined against the dark radiance streaming in. Dressed in her silvery grey nightgown, she stood motionless, her gaze lost in the vast expanse outside. Her usually steady aura seemed a bit disordered, her cold crimson eyes revealing a depth of thought Asher had seldom seen before. She only looked like that whenever there was something troubling her mind. The tranquility of the room was gently disturbed as Rowena, sensing a familiar and warm presence, came out of her reverie. His presence made her suddenly realize how much she missed him over the past few weeks. Turning from the large window, she looked over to find Asher gracing her study with his presence. A soft smile touched her lips as she studied him, her gaze tinged with relief. "Ash," she began, her voice a soothing melody in the expansive room, "did everything go well?" She knew he always completed quests during this time of the day. With an affable smile that belied the coldness in his heart, Asher approached her. "Of course, it can't go any other way," he reassured, his eyes scrutinizing the troubled expression on her face. "What about here? You seem a bit distracted." Rowena hesitated, her gaze wandering back to the sprawling kingdom beyond the window, her thoughts once again drifting into an unseen abyss. Seeing her reluctance to speak, Asher slowly closed the distance between them, wrapping his arms around her slender waist in a seemingly caring embrace while enjoying the softness of her toned stomach. And then, there was her scent. The fragrance that lingered around her was intoxicating. It was a subtle yet compelling blend of the softest lavender, combined with the crisp freshness of a dew-kissed morning, guiding her to face him. His gaze bore into hers, a veneer of concern. "Rona," he said, his voice low and coaxing, "it's no good keeping it all inside. You can tell me what's troubling you now that I am here and you are done with the investigation. We haven't been able to spend much time all these weeks." Overwhelmed by his persuasive charisma, Rowena gave in, her hands gently wrapping around his in a silent plea for understanding. Her voice was barely a whisper as she revealed, "Things aren't exactly over, Ash." His brows furrowed, a shadow of concern crossing his features. "Did the investigation not go as planned?" he inquired and added, "The people surely think it did." Rowena's sigh filled the quiet room, a heavy echo of disappointment. "The investigation was successful in unearthing traitors who exploited my blind spots in the management of certain matters in our kingdom," she admitted, her gaze melancholic. "But the true puppet here, the one who set all this into motion, remains concealed. All I came upon were dead ends." An eyebrow quirked in intrigue as Asher considered her words. Was his initial conjecture about this situation correct? He had planned to indirectly ask her if Rebecca could be the culprit, but he didn't all these days to not mislead her investigation in the off chance he was wrong. However, before he could say anything, her next words stopped him in his tracks. "The extreme steps taken to preserve their identity suggest that whoever is behind this values their secrecy, and the reason for that is because this traitor is living and breathing the same air of our lands," Rowena continued, her voice steady despite the despair creeping into her eyes. He studied her, the flicker of resolve and her gaze not escaping his attention. He ventured further, asking, "Do you have a suspect in mind? It appears you've already formed an idea." Rowena's gaze hardened as it met the expansive vista through the window. "Before I initiated the investigation, certain doubts already plagued me," she began, her voice somber yet steady. Turning slowly to face Asher, she continued, "The only plausible way for the Umbrelfians to infiltrate our kingdom unbeknownst to us would be with assistance from someone intimately acquainted with the northern lands, a knowledge garnered over centuries, perhaps millennia, and the only house with such deep-rooted familiarity of those terrains is House Thorn." Asher nodded slowly, maintaining a composed face despite the complex web of intrigue unfolding. He had anticipated this revelation, yet hearing it spoken aloud lent the situation a palpable gravity. "However, Rowena wasn't finished. Yet it is inconceivable for House Thorn to betray us in such a manner. They would stand to lose more than gain from inciting this chaos, not to mention their well-known animosity towards the Umbrelfians, stemming from ancestral disputes. It leads me to believe the traitor would need to possess House Thorn's knowledge." But Asher, understanding her line of thought, picked up the thread of the conversation, "But not necessarily belong to House Thorn?" Rowena's eyes met his, the silent affirmation in their depths crystallizing their shared suspicion. "Rebecca," Rowena uttered with a hardened expression. Inwardly, Asher felt a stir of gratification. The direction of Rowena's suspicion aligned with his own, solidifying his belief that his deductions were accurate. The best part was he didn't even have to suggest. It was surely a good thing that she began to suspect on her own. However, to understand her reasoning better, he found himself asking, "What makes you suspect the princess consort, a woman who holds a place of honor in our house and great respect in the kingdom?" Asher had never noticed Rowena showing any hostility or being skeptical about Rebecca openly, so this was a bit surprising to him. Leaning against the window, Rowena's gaze seemed to pierce through the space in front of her. The words that fell from her lips next froze the air around them. "Because broken bar, I've always been wary of her for years." The surprise, swift and sudden, swept across Asher's features, his brows arching in an incredulous arc. Asher, having recovered from his surprise, composed himself and looked at Rowena, his brows knitted in curiosity. "What do you mean you've been wary of Rebecca for years?" he asked, his tone steady, belying the intrigue swirling in his mind. He had always assumed Rebecca maintained a friendly facade towards Rowena, especially considering she was expecting Rowena to marry her son, Oberon. Because of this reason he thought Rowena might actually be blind to what kind of person Rebecca really was. The fact that Rowena never said or did anything about Rebecca confused him. Was she pretending all this time? Rowena sighed, her gaze once again lost in the vast expanse of the kingdom through the window. Long before we got married, people assumed that I was destined to wed Oberon, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, like a gentle breeze rustling the parchments on her desk. The whispers started already the moment I was born, and they grew louder with each passing year. A look of revulsion crossed her features as Rowena revealed, I didn't like these whispers even as a child since Oberon always seemed repulsive to me, and the older I got, the more unpleasant rumors I heard about him, some of which I also found out to be true. Asher couldn't help but inwardly scoff. That vile son of a bitch was already one, even as a child, and he felt even more satisfied seeing that Rowena shared the same feeling, and Rowena paused, as if searching for the right words, her hand absent-mindedly caressing the windows, was not the man I wanted to share my life with, but as I matured, I realized my wants did not matter and the weight of my duty to this kingdom as the only child of my parents, but that did not make the prospect any more bearable as I thought my marriage with him was inevitable. Asher's expression hardened, his hands tightening subtly around hers. Did you ask your father about this? To quell these rumors, Rowena nodded, her eyes meeting his. Yes, I did, several times, in fact, but strangely, my father always maintained silence on the matter of my marriage other than saying that I shouldn't worry about such things. It was strange, to say the least, and at that time, I thought he was chiding me for shying away from my responsibilities. As she said this, Rowena couldn't help but feel that her father's words were true in a way. She never got married to Oberon, and her father himself made Asher her husband. He made it seem like he was waiting for Asher to wake up, which just seemed absurd for a man who operated on certainty. Everyone at that time had told him Asher would never wake up, and if somehow he knew Asher might wake up one day, why didn't he squash the whispers? As Asher listened to Rowena, a strange feeling washed over him. In the world of nobility, where alliances were forged, and marriages were arranged often before children could even walk, Rowena's situation was certainly an anomaly. The cunning old king had been evasive about his only daughter's marital affairs. That was suspicious, to say the least. Did he already decide at that time he was going to let Rowena get married to him? Asher was finding it hard to wrap his head around it and filed this oddity away in the back of his mind, storing it for later deliberation. FTM pound FTM currency FTM inverted exclamation mark FTM diaresis FTM currency FTM cents Rebecca. She was always overly friendly during those times. Rowena sighed, her eyes briefly flicking towards the black emblem of House Drake displayed proudly on the study wall. She'd corner me at every opportunity, endlessly boasting about Oberon's achievements. If I am to be honest, it was grating even if she was quite nice to me. Sometimes I found her equally obnoxious as Oberon himself, but since she is the princess consort and my aunt in a way, I couldn't tell her off. But despite all that, Rowena continued, I must admit her strength was commendable. She even made huge contributions to our house. Because of all that, my father would publicly applaud her at times, making her feel even more confident about herself and her son. Asher's smirk grew wider. He could imagine how Rebecca's head swelled with such recognition. She must have thought she was untouchable, invincible, floating high on a cloud of self-importance. The thought of it filled him with scorn, but it also tickled his sense of humor. What made you wary of Rebecca? Asher asked, his eyes flickering with a steely curiosity. Rowena's eyes shot up as she answered, it all changed when my father made the announcement. About you, Asher, recalling the memory from this body's past, nodded, his gaze steady on her. He remembered how the younger Rowena had questioned her father's decision, her eyes brimming with confusion and apprehension. It hadn't mattered to him then. He was merely a spectator, observing the drama from a detached standpoint. But now, as Rowena voiced her past concerns, Asher found himself inexplicably affected. For some odd reason, he couldn't disregard the memory. It lingered at the edge of his consciousness, a faint reminder of a forgotten past, even if he felt it didn't matter if she didn't want to marry him at that time, since the present was obviously different. She continued, her gaze meeting his with an undeniable gravity. I remember that day. I was shocked, to say the least. Her gaze hardened as she added, but Oberon and Rebecca. They began to change. Their true nature started to show even if they didn't want to. Oberon began hovering around me even more, thinking that I would grow to like him and then change my father's mind, Rowena added, a glimmer of disgust crossing her face. What about Rebecca? She openly reacted against it? Asher asked, his interest spiking. Rowena took in a sharp breath, as she said with a cold glint in her eyes, surprisingly, number. Instead, she played it safe and incited even more elders and people to openly protest against this marriage. It was obvious after seeing some of the officials getting promoted fast while some were getting their coffers bigger. Even those who I thought were my supporters suddenly switched sides, thinking that I wouldn't become the queen since my father's announcement seemed like a joke and that he was testing people's sentiments about Oberon. Asher scoffed and said, despite being the princess consort, it seems like she doesn't mind doing underhanded tricks. I always knew she was incorrigible. Rowena nodded as she sighed and looked at him, not feeling surprised. She knew how Rebecca had been hostile with him since he woke up for obvious reasons and even went to the great extent of challenging each other through a bet in the Tower of Hell. No senior member in their right mind would challenge any junior, and Rowena remembered how this caused her worry and even still does. However, Rowena wasn't done and said, but that was something I expected from her and not really the reason why I became wary of her. Broken bar. Asher furrowed his brows and asked, what do you mean? Rowena's eyes shimmered with the memories of a time long past. She divulged to Asher, something that had been locked within her heart for years. My mother, Rowena began, her voice rich with reverence and a lingering sadness. She held nothing but disdain for Rebecca and Oberon. She did her best to shield me from their influence. The corners of her lips curled upwards in a wistful smile, recollections dancing in her gaze as though she could still see her mother's determined visage. She was the only one who actively sought to quell the whispers about Oberon and I. A pang of longing washed over Rowena, making her gaze grow distant as she spoke. Whenever those rumors reached my ears, she'd reassure me that she wouldn't let me be wedded to Oberon, that she'd find me someone better, someone deserving. Asher watched her, his icy gaze becoming glazed as she painted an image of her mother, the kind of woman, Rowena continued, a touch of pride echoing in her voice, who never hesitated to confront Rebecca, keeping her in check. That's why even Rebecca avoided coming upon her after realizing that my mother was someone who cared more about her loved ones rather than her own image or the strength and wealth of her house. As she reminisced, Asher found himself drawn into her narrative, experiencing an echo of her loss. His mind flickered with his own memories of a past life, a mother lost to time, her love and sacrifice shaping him into who he was today. A stab of old grief twisted in his chest, a ghost of a wound he had thought healed. For a fleeting second, he looked at Rowena with a newfound understanding, a shared familiarity of the pain that lingered after losing a mother. Yet, he quickly reeled his emotions back, the habitual coldness creeping back. Your mother sounds like someone I would have liked to meet, he conceded, gently rubbing Rowena's hand as a soothing gesture. Her response came as a soft smile, her gaze tender. She would have loved to meet you, Ash. Whenever she had the time, she used to care for your needs personally. She pitied you. Wondering why you had to live like that. Rowena couldn't help but imagine how much her mother would have liked Asher. The revelation caught him off guard. He couldn't fathom a noble woman lowering herself to personally take care of him, especially during his soulless years. He kept his skepticism to himself though, opting to wait until his memories returned. For all he knew, most of them didn't hesitate to use the chance to torture him for either their own sadistic pleasure or using him as an outlet to vent their frustrations and anger upon. The pain, anger, and resentment welled up in his soul during all those years was something that was still clawing at him to this day. Asher softly smiled at her. "You were lucky to have such a mother, Rona." "Buta broken bar then what happened?" Asher knew Rowena's mother died around the time she was 10 or so. "I remember. The quest, it was an expedition. Here in our own world." Her voice, usually so steady, wavered ever so slightly, like a leaf quivering on the edge of falling. "The details of the quest. They were kept from the public to prevent the quest from getting sabotaged by any moles. Even I still don't know the complete details. The ones who knew anything about it were my father and the ones who took part in the quest," she confessed, a note of bitterness creeping into her voice. "And so, the nature of the mission still remains a mystery. The people know nothing of what kind of quest my mother took part in. What they know is just a cover." Asher had a blinking expression as he wondered if her mother really didn't die from the werewolves ambushing her, or that was the story he knew. She breathed out a heavy sigh, her breath fogging the cool air momentarily. "But I remember. A group of 10 were chosen for the quest, the strongest in the kingdom. Rebecca was one of them despite my mother's protest, since my father insisted that no risks can be taken on a quest where strength mattered most," she revealed, her voice betraying an undercurrent of suspicion. Asher felt a sudden jolt of surprise at this revelation. This was a part of the story he had never heard before. He also wondered what kind of quest it was for all of them to make it a big deal. Rowena's voice suddenly dropped to a chilly tone. "Everyone who went on that expedition. They all died, all except Rebecca Broken Bar," she said, her crimson eyes gleaming with a combination of grief, suspicion, and cold deep-seated anger. "How is that possible?" Asher mumbled, the surprise coloring his features. The idea of Rebecca surviving a quest that claimed her mother's life. It was enough to stir a storm of suspicion in his mind. Rowena's lips thinned into a rigid line, her gaze hardening. "Rebecca claimed she narrowly escaped death," she admitted reluctantly, her voice as cold as the stone floor beneath them. "She said my mother had sacrificed herself to keep the rest safe, though no one else managed to survive." A red flag immediately raised in his mind. The story didn't add up. It clashed with everything he had come to know about Rowena's mother. "I find it hard to believe," Asher muttered, running his hand through his hair in consternation. "Your mother had a dragon by her side. She was one of the strongest, and she would give her life for someone like Rebecca, who she didn't even like." "That doesn't sound like the woman you described." Rowena's expression mirrored his skepticism, her eyes hard with shared disbelief. "Exactly," she agreed, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "But everyone, including my father, bought into Rebecca's version, except me. I loved my father, but sometimes the way he acts and behaves, it just a broken bar disappointed me," Rowena said as her gaze lowered. Rowena's cold voice trembled subtly, her eyes reflecting a tumultuous mix of grief and anger as she added, "There wasn't even a body. I didn't get to bury her. All I could do was pay respects to an empty tomb." She managed to choke out a mournful symphony of words that echoed hollowly against the stone walls. Her gaze lost itself in the flickering embers of the fireplace, perhaps seeing a scene play out from a past that seemed too cruel to bear. That day, Rebecca showed a side of hers I had never seen before, apologizing by saying she let my mother and everyone down and then mourning, creating a drama as if she was the most aggrieved. She would be the last person to mourn for my mother. Asher's fist tightened, a rush of seething frustration surging within him like a raging river. He clicked his tongue, a sharp, impatient sound that cut through the quiet stillness. "Can't you do anything about her?" he questioned, his voice low but the intensity of his emotions palpable. It seemed as if Rebecca was definitely dangerous to get rid of the previous queen and manipulative enough to even cause such a drama to convince others. Again, she must have had some help to get rid of the late queen. Rowena's gaze turned back to him, resignation painted starkly in her eyes. "Unfortunately, no," she admitted, shaking her head. "That incident happened years ago. I was only a princess then, and it was all settled. Even now, Rebecca has considerable power in the central and northern lands, and despite everything, she's valuable to House Drake, or that's how the elders in our house feel." She paused, as if the words were hard to swallow, As far as they know, Rebecca brings a lot of wealth and power to our house. If I challenge her now, in these trying times, it could plunge our kingdom into chaos. We're still trying to heal. The last thing we need is more instability." A sharp inhale from Asher sliced through the silence. The frustration bristling in his chest mirrored in the stern set of his jaw. He'd always been an individual who never had to care for hundreds of people, let alone millions of them. Dealing with the political machinations of a kingdom was a new realm of exasperation for him. *FTM currency FTM FTM superscript AFTM diaresis FTM.F currency F degrees F registered as he watched Rowena. He understood her predicament. As the queen, she couldn't afford to let her personal feelings guide her decisions. The safety and welfare of her kingdom, her people, were paramount. He knew the weight of obligation hung heavy on her shoulders. The burden of her dead parents' legacy, of protecting and caring for the kingdom they had ruled, clearly visible in her somber gaze. Even if Rowena somehow manages to make Rebecca go down, it would weaken House Drake and the kingdom as a whole, at least on the outside, which could invite new unseen or familiar troubles which Rowena was trying to avoid. Asher's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, a realization breaking through the surface of his mind. "Is that why?" he began, his gaze meeting Rowena's. "You have been so neutral towards Rebecca and Oberon, as if you harbor no animosity against them?" Rowena nodded, her expression calm but her eyes displaying a shrewdness he hadn't seen before. "Father always said to keep your enemies closer while ensuring they remain oblivious to your thoughts," she confessed, her voice carrying a hint of her father's wisdom. "That's why I let them be. It's much easier to manage them if they believe I'm not onto them." At her words, a chuckle of bemused admiration rumbled deep in Asher's chest. His perception of Rowena shifted, making room for this newfound understanding of her character. She was more complex than he initially thought. He clearly underestimated her. In fact, she'd been playing her cards so close to her chest that even he, who'd spent so much time with her, hadn't picked up on her act. It struck him then that being a good actor, putting up a convincing facade, was probably one of the vital skills needed as a ruler. Of course, it wasn't a skill he was worried about being bad at. Keeping everyone in the shadows and acting like a valiant, generous, and loving royal consort for more than a year made him realize he was a natural at this, but he did realize he had yet to fully understand the woman standing before him. However, his brows drooped together in a thoughtful frown. His eyes probing her own, he asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me about all this, after everything we've been through, everything that happened?" He sighed, a hint of disappointment in his voice. He thought she would confide in him with everything now that she was in love with him. That was why he had been risking his life and putting in so much effort to gain her confidence. Even if it wouldn't change anything, he would have felt better knowing she also held such suspicions and anger against Oberon and Rebecca. Rowena responded by placing her hand tenderly on his chest, her touch soft as a feather. She swallowed softly, her eyes shimmering with worry. "Don't misunderstand. I didn't mean to keep it from you, Ash," she confessed, her voice barely audible, laden with deep regret. "I did it to protect you since you were waking up for the first time, and I never thought your immortal bloodline would help you quickly catch up with our world. And Rebecca, she's dangerous. If she was really behind my mother's death, I didn't want to take any chances, even if I am the queen now." As she spoke, her voice wavered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the reality of her fears laid bare between them. She added, "That's why I've been acting neutral on the surface, biding my time for a moment of her vulnerability, while taking silent measures to protect you, though you never really needed them," Rowena said with warmth and pride glimmering in her eyes. Asher realized the reason was simple. He now could see why she appointed Eradicator as his protector from the get-go and why nobody tortured him after he got married. At least, that was what he felt, since he had no memories of anyone torturing him after getting married, not even a memory of Oberon or anyone else coming to toy with him. He realized once she became the queen, she must have personally kept an eye on him, which must have deterred anyone else from trying to hurt him again, while previously, her father was letting it happen on his watch. He understood her fear, her need to protect him. Was it that she fell in love with him too much to become overprotective? Drawing in a deep breath, he held her shoulders, his gaze meeting hers with determination. You don't have to bear this burden alone, Rona. Please don't keep things from me again, he insisted. I might not be strong enough right now, but that doesn't mean I'm a fool. I won't act recklessly or harm our kingdom. Rowena gave him a soft, appreciative smile as she held his hands, her heart swelling with relief. I understand that now, she murmured, her voice finally steadying. That's why I'm telling you all this now. For the first time in a long while, Rowena felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. She was finally able to share one of her deepest concerns and fears with Asher, and his understanding, his promise, brought her an unexpected sense of solace. Asher's gaze flickered with a new resolve. Breaking the momentary silence, he asked, "Still, should we still do nothing about Rebecca now? I understand that we don't have any evidence against her, but after everything that's happened, after the war, doing nothing just doesn't sit right with me." Rowena drew in a long breath, the exhale trembling on her lips. "Ash," she began, her voice bearing the weight of their shared burdens, "it's a hard truth we must confront. We can't make a move against Rebecca right now. You know why?" The echoes of her admission rang heavily in the room, a silence ensnaring the pair as she gathered her thoughts. Asher let out a sigh, knowing Rowena would never risk her kingdom appearing weak or unstable to the enemies outside or inside, especially when the kingdom was far from its peak strength. Her gaze softened as she looked at him, her tone shifting, warmth seeping into her words. "But there's one thing I've learned from our war with the Umbral Fiends," she continued, her voice steady, "it's that I can depend on you, Ash. You've proven yourself, not just as an individual but as a capable guardian of this kingdom. Even if you aren't yet a peak expert of the kingdom." Drawing a deep breath, she squared her shoulders, her gaze firm on his. "So, I want you to conduct secret investigations on Rebecca," she instructed, her voice ringing with determination. "As queen, there are places and methods I can't use, but you have a talent for this. I trust you to get the information we need, information I can't. This is something I can only entrust to you." As she spoke, her mind wandered to his ventures at the honeyed pearls, which he had told her about in the past, his skill in subtly extracting useful information from casual conversations. Even if she wasn't fond of him visiting such a place, she chose to not stop him from doing something that could help the kingdom. She had faith in his ability to handle people, to unearth the secrets people desperately clung to. Asher took a moment to collect his thoughts as he realized that even if it was frustrating and wasn't the most effective way, he could do what Rowena asked with the help of Kira and probably a certain someone as well, and at least now he had Rowena's support on going after Rebecca. Asher offered a comforting nod, a reassuring smile playing on his lips. "Don't worry," he started, his voice echoing the resolve in his gaze. "I'll do what you've asked of me." The gratitude that swelled within Rowena was evident in the warmth that sparked in her eyes. She looked at him, her gaze searing and sincere. "Thank you for understanding, for everything." She paused before adding, "My father took care of me well and taught me everything I know now, but I used to resent him for leading me to believe that I was destined to marry Oberon. But now," her voice wavered slightly, "I no longer feel so because he led me to you." Asher smiled warmly though inwardly, he knew her father surely did it with hidden motivations. Rowena allowed the words to sink in as she recollected the past with a hint of nostalgia. "I am also glad my father didn't heed my pleas to reconsider the marriage. Back then, I could have never known." A flash of memory lit up in Asher's mind, the image of Rowena begging her father to rethink the marriage. It was a stark contrast to the woman sitting across him now, at peace with her past. His brow furrowed in confusion as he tried to reconcile the Rowena from his memory with the one before him. If she wanted to marry him, why would she protest against it? Wait a broken bar, why would she even want to marry a cripple? Catching sight of his confusion, Rowena's hand found his, fingers interlocking in a soft hold. She couldn't help the smile that curved her lips as she continued, "I did want to marry you, Ash, it's just that back then, I believed I was being selfish by making that choice. Asher shook his head as he asked with a confused look, "What do you mean?" The answer he received was not something he expected. "I couldn't shake off the feeling that you were suffering inside," Rowena confessed, her eyes filled with an unspoken torment, and added, "Sometimes I wondered if you were really soulless or if our broken bar there was a soul stuck inside that body, helpless to do anything." Rowena also remembered Ygritte telling her that Asher was better off dead, but when she asked him why he said that, he only said that the worst thing than death was living without a soul. What Ygritte said was something that still stuck with her in her mind. Hey, a broken bar? She really doesn't know a broken bar. Asher's veins rippled with cold rage as he remembered how everyone spat and stepped on him like trash as he laid there helplessly. And the one he hated the most was her father, who let it all happen right under his eyes. Maybe the people were indeed right to think that her father took him in for amusement. The only thing that prevented him from fully believing this was what her father said to him before he died and the strange way he died as well. However, he didn't know what to think upon seeing how Rowena wasn't wrong about what she felt. He realized now in that memory where she was urging her father to rethink the marriage was nothing but an indirect way of asking him to end his misery. If he was really stuck inside a vegetable body, he would only feel glad if someone ended him rather than live a life of never-ending pain. All this time, he had misunderstood the reason behind her saying that. He thought it was a normal reaction from a young girl who was being forced to marry a vegetable. However, what he couldn't understand was why someone like her would care about a soulless cripple like him. Why would she care if he dies or lives? Wait, a broken bar? Did this mean that a broken bar? The question that slipped out of his mouth next, however, was more out of curiosity than anything. "Did you visit me during those years?" he asked, his voice unintentionally softer. "Fs, Fs, Fs, Y, Fs, Z, Fs, U, Fso, Fso, Fs, Fs." Rowena seemed to fumble for words, a faint blush creeping onto her cheeks. It was an unusual sight, seeing the typically stoic queen flush with embarrassment. She confessed, "Yes, I did. At first, it was out of curiosity about your alien and mysterious origins and why my father brought you, but as time passed, I found myself just wanting to talk to a broken bar, talking about things I can't tell anybody else." Rowena rubbed her left brow gently as she felt even more embarrassed revealing this to Asher. Asher was blinking in surprise, not expecting him to be sort of Rowena's friend even as a child. Most of all, why couldn't he remember any of this? Was this the reason why she was quite lenient with him when he first woke up despite trying to piss her off? He did feel she was giving in to some of his demands at first without much hesitation. Was she fond of him even before he woke up? Asher didn't know, but he just never saw this coming. It was an intriguing revelation that made him wonder why his mind chose to keep this part of his past locked away. Were the painful memories so overpowering that they drowned out the others? Asher softly chuckled as he asked, "Now I'm even more curious. What did you talk about? It must be something good for you to not tell me," he said with a teasing smile. Rowena's response was just as unexpected as she averted her gaze with a faint reddish hue in her cheeks. "It seemed silly, what I did, what I talked about with you. I hoped you wouldn't remember," she confessed, her words just above a whisper. "But when I woke up, I felt as if you were not that familiar with me." Asher remembered how cold and distant Rowena was during those days. Rowena sighed as she said, a soft curve of her lips, "I know a broken bar, but that is because I didn't know how to talk to you. I never expected you to wake up suddenly, and the person you were at that time seemed quite different from how I imagined. You seemed angry and rebellious, and I didn't know if the soul that awakened in your body was the same as the one before, but now I am sure it has been you the entire time. You know," she continued in a voice barely above a whisper, her eyes filled with tenderness, "after my mother died, it was you who gave me strength." Her gaze dropped to their entwined fingers, her thumb gently tracing circles on the back of his hand. "You were my pillar," she continued, her voice carrying a note of nostalgia, "even in your soulless state. When my father left me too, your presence gave me the fortitude to move forward. I felt I wasn't alone." Suddenly, in an act of raw emotion, she slowly enveloped Asher in a tight hug, burying her face in the crook of his neck. I might not have understood it when I was younger," she confessed, "but now, I can tell, I have liked you, even before you woke up." Her admission hung in the air, her words seeming to weave an enchanting spell around them. "Not a day went by," she added with a sigh, "where I didn't wish for you to wake up." At her words, Asher's world seemed to come to a standstill. His mind, which was usually a well-organized fortress of thoughts and plans, was now in utter chaos. An avalanche of memories buried deep in his subconscious burst forth, flooding his mind with images of Rowena in different stages of her life. A younger version of Rowena, her bright eyes filled with innocence and wonder, came into focus. She was animatedly sharing stories of her day with his motionless body, her laughter echoing around the room. The stark contrast between her vibrant past and the reserved woman she had grown into would make anyone feel it was fascinating yet tragic. The child grew up in his memories, her face maturing, the brightness in her eyes slowly being replaced with a layer of frost. But even then, she was by his side, her soft voice narrating her dreams, hopes, and fears to his lifeless form. Most of it involved her reminiscing about her mother and sometimes talking about her father, and very few times expressing her misgivings about Rebecca and Oberon. But every single of those memories ended with her wishing for him to wake up. As a child, she wished he would wake up so that they could play and have fun together. As a teenager, she wished he would wake up so that they could become stronger together. And as a queen, she wished she could end his suffering. With every flashback, he felt his stone-cold heart twist and churn, a maelstrom of regret, guilt, and a surprising tenderness consuming him. Even if he had only been together with Rowena for more than a year, these memories made him feel as if he had been with her for more than a decade, each memory making him feel as if he lived the entirety of it. He unconsciously tightened his hold around Rowena, his fingers brushing against her soft hair, silent words echoing in the small gap between them. In the middle of the storm brewing in his heart, he was wary of letting this tenderness consume him, but a singular thought stood out. What if Rowena was different from Era? What if she wouldn't betray him as Era did? As this thought took root in his mind, he felt a strange pull towards Rowena, a yearning he never expected to experience again. Rowena, her eyes closed in contentment, felt his warmth surround her like a gentle wave. This was the first time she felt her soul getting swept away by it. But suddenly, Rowena's aura that was seeping into his heart was disrupted when a subtle emerald light flickered briefly from the dark green mudstone ring on his finger. As the light dimmed, another memory pierced through all others until only it remained in his mind as clear as crystal. It was a memory of a 6-year-old Rowena sitting by his side, tears streaming down her cherubic face as she confessed the failure of her first reaping quest, which was supposed to be easy. Asher wasn't surprised she was trying to learn reaping at such a young age, and she seemed quite distraught that she failed it. But when she went on telling what her quest was about and how it turned out, it sent a jolt of pure shock and agony through him as a painful memory buried deep within his heart exploded into his mind like a raging volcano. In an instant, the warmth of Rowena's love that had just begun to wrap around his heart, felt like it was ripped away. He pushed her away involuntarily, a sudden wave of cold detachment replacing the warmth of moments ago. Rowena, taken aback, looked at him, her eyes filled with confusion. Asher quickly pulled himself together, hiding the raging turmoil inside. I just remembered, I have a meeting with my vassals," he forced a smile with a weak excuse his shaken mind quickly came up with, his heart still reeling from the revelation and his veins trembling. "But if you want me to stay," Rowena, still caught in the abruptness of his withdrawal and the way his aura was trembling, shook her head softly. "No, go, we can talk later." But she felt a tinge of disappointment that they couldn't stay longer in each other's embrace a little longer. With a final peck on her forehead, Asher walked away. As soon as he turned the corner, the facade of warmth evaporated, replaced by an chilling coldness that was ever darker. As Rowena watched his back fade into the distance, she couldn't help but wonder if something was wrong, or that was what her intuition was telling, though she couldn't think of any reason why. Just a moment ago, they were in a warm world of their own, but the next moment he left, leaving behind only coldness that she had lived in too long to not fail to feel it. Asher emerged from the regal confines of the study hall, his heart pounding a discordant rhythm against his ribcage after learning that Rowena was the demon responsible for his mother's death. He struggled to suppress the grimace pulling at his lips as he felt his mind spinning and his vision blurring from the realization, for once again, he had allowed his scarred heart to seek the solace of love. He berated himself internally for almost repeating his past mistake, but now, the chilling revelation about Rowena was a wake-up call, a harsh reminder of the peril that lay hidden in the guise of affection. He resolved to annihilate that part of him which still harbored human feelings from his past life, the part that sought the warmth of love. Even as a human he thought love would soothe the pain left behind by his sufferings, but now he was determined to not let this part make him vulnerable again. However, the resolution did nothing to assuage the throbbing pain in his heart. His mother's final words echoed hauntingly in his mind, the expression she made in her last moment etched into his memory. All his life as a hunter, he had been driven by a single mission, a singular goal: to find and eliminate the demon who took his mother away from him. That had been the only driving force that led him into the perilous world of hunters and demons. He always knew that his mission was near impossible. His mother was an ordinary woman, and any demon capable of killing her would have been weak. The likelihood of such a demon still being alive was slim to none. It was a bitter truth he had grappled with for years, yet the cruel irony was that the demon he had been seeking all his life had been beside him all along, hiding behind the face of the woman he was married to. The devastating revelation left his heart grinding against his chest. He had found who he was looking for after all these years, but all he could do was walk away. He had never felt so pathetic and angry that he let down his mother and himself. The searing pain was almost unbearable. He wanted nothing more than to sit down somewhere and clear his chaotic mind, but he couldn't risk it. Not here, not now, not when Rowena could be watching him. He could no longer trust his own judgment about her after realizing he was foolish to think he got to know her completely. He couldn't afford to presume what she might or might not do, and so, without wasting another moment, he decided to leave for the Nyadon tribe. He needed distance, he needed to be away from here for a while, and most importantly, he needed to regain control over his heart that was now teetering on the precipice of chaos. Asher finally descended upon the Nyadon village, a place that was the farthest from the castle. Of course, as usual, Eradicator was the one accompanying him and dropping him off here. After what happened recently, he became wary of Eradicator too since she was under Rowena's command. Paranoia curled in his stomach like a coiled serpent, making him hyper-aware of everything going on around him and second-guessing the motives of everyone, and he knew he mostly had himself to blame for this. Still, he reminded himself to wear his usual demeanor like an armor, lest his inner turmoil cause anyone else to be suspicious. Thanks to a secret message he sent to Kellum, he was able to make Kellum send him a message through his whisper's tone to make it seem like the meeting was postponed so that Eradicator would buy into it and he can spend some time alone. Stepping down from Eradicator's mount, Asher scanned the scene, his lips curling into a customary smile as the villagers rushed forward to greet him. Each joyous cheer, every wide-eyed look of admiration, felt like a needle to his frayed heart that was pounding against the confines of his chest. He questioned his choice of coming to this bustling village when he could have sought the solitude of some far-off place to clear his chaos-riddled mind. Yet, before his thoughts could spiral further, a thunderous crash echoed through the vicinity. In the distance, the tranquil waves of the sea had transformed into raging swirls, as if being beckoned by some unseen force. The waves parted, giving way to a formidable sight. Khaleesi, his monstrous yet affectionate beast companion, emerged from the depths of the ocean. The big baby kraken, a colossal being enveloped in a shell blacker than the deepest abyss, made her way towards the shore, her excitement palpable even from this distance. Her enormous crustacean form crashed against the water, her every movement causing the sea to thrash in response. One of the Umbrelfians was clinging onto one of her legs after she suddenly rushed out of the waters when some of them were trying to play with it, but Khaleesi shook him off effortlessly as she hurried forward, making him fly back into the waters with a surprised cry. As she barreled towards Asher, the villagers and the Umberolfians scurried to clear a path. Their awestruck faces painted a picture of both fear and admiration. For a brief moment, amidst the chaos of his turmoil, Asher couldn't help but feel his heart slow down slowly upon seeing Khaleesi rushing towards him like he was the only one she could see right now, and immediately he knew what he should do now. In an agile leap, he hoisted himself onto the back of the massive baby, his grip secure against the rugged, black shell. He bent low, his lips brushing against the cool carapace as he whispered his commands. "Khaleesi, let's go, swim away as far as you can." Broken bar. The humongous baby let out a low rumble, a gesture of acknowledgement, as her pincers snapped together in what seemed like giddy anticipation. In a swift motion, Khaleesi turned round, her massive body effortlessly slicing through the water, causing waves to crash onto the shore. The villagers could only watch in awe while the Umberolfians watched in dismay as their baby guardian beast responded to his commands and retreated into the endless stretch of the ocean. One moment they were attempting to get familiar with their young guardian, the next, they watched as she was led away by the royal consort into the unknown. Confusion laced the faces of the Nyadan people as they saw their beloved consort disappear into the vast sea with Khaleesi. An air of confusion hung over the crowd, their eyes gleaming with speculation and surprise since this was the first time he was going into the oceans. Where is he going? Maybe he just wanted to train with her in the waters? Whispers rippled through the crowd, their murmurs intertwining with the fading echoes of the receding waves. The ocean's expanse stretched before them, an endless abyss of glittering red. Asher sat cross-legged atop Khaleesi's shell, his fingers gently skimming the water's surface, the splashes punctuating the silence. He was feeling so broken, angry and resentful earlier, and now those emotions had surprisingly calmed down a bit as he came here, yet still churned within him. He knew he can't go back to the castle like this, for Rowena would surely notice it. She was far more perceptive than he thought, and so, here he was. Eradicator also can't follow him this far since her mount can't stay in the skies for too long. He didn't tell Khaleesi to go too deep since he didn't want to get anywhere near the forbidden waters and could already spot the chaotic seas in the horizon, and so Khaleesi bobbed rhythmically with the waves, her murky green eyes swiveling to watch Asher with an endearing curiosity, the waves reflecting in her gaze. It was an innocent fascination, a striking contrast to the troubles weighing down Asher's mind. His heart was still heavy with a whirlwind of emotions, yet the calming serenity of the ocean offered a strange comfort. His lips parted as she suddenly began, "Why can't I ever learn?" He began, his voice barely audible over the music of the sea. His gaze was fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky, as if searching for answers in the vast expanse. Khaleesi let out a low rumble, a sound that Asher had come to recognize as her listening intently. He lightly patted her shell, the cold, hard surface beneath his palm grounding him. "I thought it wouldn't happen again. I thought I was wiser this time," he admitted, a trace of bitterness lining his words. His grip on her shell tightened, the firm, unyielding texture of it reminding him of the harsh realities he was grappling with. "But I was wrong, Khaleesi, I was terribly wrong. I have always been surrounded by the wrong people, broken bar people who hurt my soul." Asher didn't know why he was saying all this to Khaleesi, but the heaviness in his chest made him feel like he had to get it out, and he indeed was feeling better the more he talked to her. All this time he had been bottling it all up and eating away at him. Since Khaleesi can't tell anyone and was bonded to him, he felt she was the only one he can share these things with. He was glad he had a beast companion like her. He didn't need anybody else. He paused, taking a deep breath. As he gathered his thoughts, he gazed down Khaleesi's beady eyes, his expression softening. You're my companion, Khaleesi, and I want you to remember something," he said, his voice commanding. "Trust and love, they are dangerous things, and it can hurt you when you least expect it." His words hung in the air, a mirror to his raw vulnerability. He caressed her shell as he added with a cold, determined look in his eyes, "That is why you can never trust anyone else but me, Khaleesi. I wouldn't want you getting tricked or getting hurt by someone else." A broken bar. Khaleesi let out a sound, a strange, soft purr that seemed to reverberate through the silent expanse of the ocean. Asher shook his head as he rubbed his forehead. Sigh, forget it, you might not even understand what I am saying. Maybe upon feeling the heaviness of his aura of hearing his words, Khaleesi became restless beneath him. Her large, bulbous eyes looked up towards Asher, a sense of worry embedded deep within their dark depths. She clumsily began to move one of her gigantic pincers over her shell, trying to reach out to Asher, but, alas, it was too far to reach. Despite her massive size and formidable strength, her pincers couldn't reach the top of her shell where Asher sat. Asher noticed Khaleesi's innocent attempt at trying to comfort him out of the corner of his eyes, making his stone-cold expression soften as he leaned forward to pat her pincer. "Aren't you a good girl?" A broken bar. Asher began to realize in this unlikely companionship, there was an unexpected sense of comfort and understanding even if Khaleesi was a beast. Maybe it was all that he needed to move on and do whatever was necessary. He realized he had let Rowena unknowingly influence his heart and distracted him from focusing on what he should have after being with her all this time and seeing all those memories of her with him. And so he was now more than determined than ever to focus on avenging his own death and then deal with everything else later. Yet it clawed at his mind when he wondered why, after learning it was her, the first thought in his mind coo-oo. Suddenly, he furrowed his brows as Khaleesi began to snap her pincers while letting out loud mewls, making him wonder why she was doing that now unless a broken bar. But his eyes caught the faint disturbance in the rhythm of the ocean, the minute alteration in the pattern of waves colliding against Khaleesi's colossal body. He immediately turned around his head to see who was sneaking up behind him. Chapter 220, witnessed a haunting past as Asher turned his gaze from the infinite expanse of the ocean to the splashing sound. His eyes met a sight that was as dazzling as the sea under the moonlight. Isola, he felt as if he should have expected her to come after him after hearing he took Khaleesi into the seas. Like a divine nymph emerging from a mythical painting, Isola suddenly rose from the depths of the sea. Her twilight blue skin shimmered under the sun's soft glow, the droplets of water magnifying her ethereal radiance as they slipped into her deep cleavage. Her glowing, silvery white hair cascaded down her back, cascading like a waterfall, the ends wet with the sea's embrace, adding a wild allure to her. Her presence was an enchanting blend of seductive and majestic, commanding an attention that Asher couldn't help but grant. Her slender, athletic form lifted herself onto Khaleesi's shell as her lower body seamlessly transformed from the sinuous, scaled coils of a fishtail to legs with an elegance only nature could muster. The moment Isola stabilized herself on Khaleesi's shell, her sapphire gaze flitted towards Asher, an undercurrent of worry coursing beneath her skepticism. "Why are you out here, Asher? What made you bring Khaleesi to such a distant place all of a sudden?" she questioned with confusion glowing in her eyes while trying to veil her anxiety. Asher, however, let a cold scoff escape his lips. "I don't see why I should explain my actions to you, Isola," he retorted, his tone as icy as the sea around them. Isola's eyes widened slightly in surprise, taken aback by his rebuff and the chilly aura emanating from him. He surely didn't seem to be in a good mood compared to how he was all this time. "I know Khaleesi has imprinted on you too, but remember your place," Asher continued, his gaze hardening. He then lifted his hand, palm facing upward, his voice resolute. "Since you came all the way over here, hand over the life crystals and leave. I want to be alone with Khaleesi." Isola immediately bristled, ready to speak out in protest. But Asher cut her off swiftly. "You can either comply, or I will ensure you never see Khaleesi again." Isola visibly flinched at his words, her gaze flickering between Asher and Khaleesi. "How can you say something like that in front of her?" she whimpered, the hurt evident in her voice. But the next moment, she sighed as she conceded, her hand reaching out to grab his wrist. Knowing that his mood wasn't good, she reluctantly decided to just let it be. However, she was quite curious about what happened for him to be like this and to come out all the way here. This was the first time he took out Khaleesi like this, but the moment their palms touched, a sudden jolt ran up Isola's arm, like a bolt of lightning through her veins. Her eyes, previously focused and composed, widened in shock as they were flooded with a whirlwind of images and emotions that were foreign. She felt as though she had been plunged into a raging river, its forceful current pulling her under. In the murkiness of the unfathomable rush of memories, a singular, devastating image formed in Isola's mind. It was a grim tableau, etched in the shades of despair and terror, and it froze her to the core. She saw a small, humble human house, its Spartan interior illuminated by the dim, wavering glow of a single light. The shadows danced grotesquely on the peeling wallpaper, breathing an eerie life into the scene. In one corner, through a large broken mirror on the side, she saw a little human boy looking around 6 years old, his wide, innocent eyes filled with unspeakable terror. She was seeing everything from the eyes of this boy and could see that he was desperately trying to make himself smaller, his small body crunched against the crumbling wall as if he wished to disappear into it. He was calling out to the woman on the other side weakly, "Mama." His mother, a figure who should have reflected love and comfort, was a heartbreaking sight. Dressed in worn-out clothes, she stood hunched, her frail body trembling like a leaf in the wind. Her hand, shaking uncontrollably, gripped a knife that reflected the light with a sinister gleam. "Mama, what? Why?" The boy's voice, thin and shaky, echoed in the tense silence, his tear-streaked face reflecting his confusion and fear. The woman staggered towards him, her expression twisted in a horrible grimace of struggle. "Mama. Stop. Please." With every shaky step she took, the blade of the knife in her hand inched dangerously closer to the boy's tiny chest as he continued to beg her to stop. His small fingers clawed against the wall behind him, his breath hitching in terrified sobs. Suddenly, the woman stumbled and knelt on the floor, clutching his neck with her free hand. The knife, still in her grasp, wavered precariously close to him. Her eyes, previously vacant, suddenly sparked with a desperate determination. She looked at her son, her face softening for a fleeting moment. "Forgive me for being so weak," a broken bar she croaked, her voice barely audible over the deafening pound of her heartbeat. "You deserve ... better." A broken bar, a weak yet smile of despair and torment struggled to fall on her lips as tears streamed down her hollow cheeks. With that, she suddenly turned the knife towards herself with a sharp grimace, and with a swift, determined motion, slit her own throat. Isola unconsciously grimaced inwardly as the drops of blood fell on the boy's face. The sharp gasp that escaped the woman's lips seemed to suck all the sound from the room, leaving behind a suffocating silence. She collapsed onto the floor, her life slowly ebbing away, leaving her eyes staring vacantly at her son. "Mama." Isola felt the boy's heart-shattering grief as he hugged the corpse of his mother, crying out his soul. She could clearly see that a demon was trying to reap the soul of the mother, but somehow, the mother regained control of herself for a brief second and killed herself to prevent herself from harming her own son. The echo of the boy's cries resonated in her mind, leaving her staggered by the sheer magnitude of the torment he had endured. Just as the heartbreaking memory began to fade, another rush of imagery took its place, much like a tide washing away footprints in the sand. Isola's eyes widened, her heart pounding in her chest as she plunged into the depth of another memory. This time, it was not a humble house that took form but a chaotic battlefield, the ground charred and scarred, the air thick with the scent of smoke and blood. In the midst of the chaos stood a lone figure, a man of towering stature, bloodied and battered, his aura flickering like a flame on the verge of being extinguished. Surrounding him were figures radiating powerful auras, each a beacon of deadly intent. Their gazes were locked onto the injured man, their expressions a mixture of awe and ruthless determination. Yet, none of them could match the potent presence of the man in the center. Even in his state of severe injury, his face was a storm of emotions. Shock, confusion, sadness, and anger twisted his features into a raw display of pain of the soul as everyone he trusted and loved suddenly turned against him. As Isola witnessed this, her heart twinged with a strange sense of empathy. She could almost feel the man's pain as if it were her own, and didn't know why it was affecting her so. Suddenly, the memory began to move. It unfolded like a tragic play, the actors set in their roles, the climax approaching with an unstoppable force. The injured man stood his ground, fighting and killing off the hunters one by one, but with each passing moment, his strength waned, his injuries holding him back, and his aura flickering precariously until he fell. However, every second he fought, she felt that more than the injuries, it was his own broken heart that held him back the most. The scenes of battle and loss faded, replaced by a shift in time and setting that hit Isola like a physical blow. The harsh metallic smell of blood was now replaced with a sterile, clinical scent, so out of place in the cruel context it found itself. The vision transported her to a stark room, cold and emotionless, adorned only with a single bed in the center. Upon it lay a figure, a small boy who was lifelessly staring at the roof of the cold room above. The boy was not human, and the surroundings had royal elegance, eerily similar to the room of someone she knew. That much was clear. Sometimes the room was filled with figures, a few of which were finely dressed and dignified, the elite of society, most of whom she even recognized, yet, their actions and expressions were far from noble. Cruel smiles played on their lips as they watched the boy, sadistic pleasure evident in their eyes. They relished in his pain, in the silent cries that echoed from his soul, yet never left his lips. Harsh words were thrown at the boy, whispers of torture and pain, each one an icy dagger to his heart. Yet, the boy remained silent, his eyes void of any protest, any plea for mercy. The helplessness of his situation seemed etched into every cell of his being, in the dull resignation of his eyes. For years, this torture persisted as even the servants treated the boy like trash. The memory stretched on, an endless loop of torment and sadism, pain and silent suffering. Each passing day was etched into the boy's eyes, each word of torment woven into the very fabric of his being. Isola's heart twisted in her chest as she watched, her grip tightening around Asher's wrist without her even realizing it. A raw, heart-wrenching pain filled her chest, her breath hitching as the torturous images relentlessly played out before her for years. Overwhelmed by the onslaught of these memories, Isola gasped, the reality of the visions finally sinking in. She stumbled back, her legs giving out under the weight of what she had seen. She fell onto Khalees's hard shell, her body shaking with the aftershocks of the emotional turbulence she'd just endured. Just a few moments ago, Asher was looking out at the horizon, waiting for Isola to finish transferring the life crystals while lost in his thoughts. But a sudden shift in weight broke Asher's concentration, and he spun around to see Isola sprawled on Khalees's shell, her twilight blue skin paler than he'd ever seen before. Her eyes were wide open, staring into some unseen distance, as if haunted by some dreadful specter. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her entire body seemed to tremble. He frowned, puzzled by this sudden display of vulnerability. He had never seen Isola showing such overt weakness, and her usually calm and collected face now wore an expression of shock and disbelief. "What's wrong with you? You have barely started," he asked, his voice as cold and impassive as the wind that swept across the ocean. Isola slowly turned her gaze towards Asher, her eyes, wide and shaking, bore into him as a name escaped her lips. Cedric, a broken bar. It was barely a whisper, yet it echoed in the silence like a thunderclap to Asher.